Hello. Hello, everyone. How is everybody today? Hope you're doing well. I'm doing pretty well today. That's right. I think today is a good day to reflect on one's ethical values. So I look forward to doing that with you here today, chat. Hello, Tia. Yes, hello. Nice to see you. Your little blue hearts always brighten my day, so thank you very much for that. Also, I saw that you were streaming earlier today, both you and Karis. So today's one of those rare days where all of Philosophy streams on the same day. Actually, I don't know if they're that rare, but anyway, it is one of those days where the stars align. I couldn't watch, unfortunately, because I was busy with some other things today, and I actually had to miss almost all of Karis' stream as well. But might go back and check the VODs later for both of those. But anyway, I hope that those streams went well. Yeah, it looked like you were making some more progress in Unicorn Overlord. So that's quite cool. By the way, everyone, for anybody who might not have seen in the description of this video, I should mention that the idea for this stream came from Tia. I believe there's also a link in the description, so if you'd like to see Tia taking the Moral Foundations test, the link should be there. When I saw that, I thought, like, hey, this is a really cool idea for a stream, getting to see what are the foundations of one's values. You know, what does this test, what might it reveal about the way one thinks about ethics? So thank you, Tia, for the idea for this stream. I'm not having a good day, but I still wanted to come out here to support you and see what you had to say. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that you're not having a good day. Not sure if it's the kind of thing where it might plausibly get better as the day goes on, but to the extent that it is, I hope that it gets better. I hope that your day gets better. And if it doesn't, then I hope tomorrow might be better. But thank you, in any case, for stopping by. That does mean a lot. Also, Kale, welcome. I saw a TFR stream on this test. How do you think you'll compare to them? That is a good question. Yeah, how do I think I will compare? Well, I'm not sure there's anyone who could value fairness more than Tia, so I don't know if my valuation of fairness will be as high. Of course, I care about fairness too, but I'm actually not sure exactly how the weighings of this test work. I've never taken the test before. This will be my first time. And like, if caring a whole lot for one value means like you don't have quite as much of a score to like devote to the others. Anyway, I'll look at the different foundations that it offers in a moment, and I'll read to you all the description of the test and how it works. I suspect that I will have a pretty high premium placed on liberty, because I know that liberty is one of the foundations listed. So I suspect for me, probably that one will be pretty high up there. But beyond that, it's difficult to speculate. I'm glad you liked the idea for this, by the way. Yeah, no, it was a really cool idea for a stream. I'm always interested in whatever cool ideas people have, especially when it comes to ideas for philosophy-type streams. And so, yeah, I think that this one is really solid. It's already 8 p.m., so I'll probably go to bed confused and upset, I fear. But perhaps tomorrow will be a better day. Well, I hope so. Yeah, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. So chat, one thing I should say before we actually look in detail at the test itself is that there was a time when I was pretty confident about the moral values that I had, and in particular, confident that whatever deeply held or whatever foundational values I might have, that I would be able to find some argument for them that would perhaps be compelling even to an opponent of those values. It's almost a little embarrassing to say now, but I do think that I was overconfident in my younger years. Whereas now, I'm not quite as sure of my values. I think that there's an increasing skepticism that I've come to feel as a result of studying philosophy, which is not to say that I don't hold values anymore. It's just that I'm no longer quite as confident that if I were to encounter someone who held firmly opposing values, I'm no longer as confident that I would be able to have an argument for why my values are to be preferred. Or at least an argument that would engage with the other person. I might be able to appeal to my own intuitions, and maybe that could justify the values that I hold for me. But I know there was a time when I felt pretty sure that there would always be some argument in the offing that could engage even with the values held by a deeply committed opponent. So I think that that's something that's interesting to think about, at least when I think about my own evolution as a philosopher. I think oftentimes studying philosophy more and more over the years does bring about a certain tentativeness in the way that one thinks about one's views, and that very much has been the case for me. So for the values that we see today, chat, whatever the results of the test display for me, I can't guarantee that I will have an argument that would convince or even engage with people who might hold staunchly opposing values. To the extent that I can provide arguments for the answers I'll give, I will do so. But there is a part of me that wonders, when we get to the really foundational level, as I think this test will attempt to, will arguments at some point run out? It's always a question on the back of my mind when I think about these things. The dimensions aren't a zero-sum thing, by the way. It's possible to score highly on all of them. Okay, I see. Interesting, interesting. That helps to know. I remember openly speculating that you'd score highly on Liberty when I was streaming. Glad to hear I wasn't just BSing. That's right. Yeah, I think that was a very reasonable guess, Tia. So if I don't end up scoring highly on Liberty, I will be just as surprised as you are. But yes, I would say arguments or no arguments, I think this test should be interesting, at the very least as a diagnostic, as a sense of like, hey, here's how you think about ethics. So let's go ahead and go over to it, chat. Here you can see we have the Moral Foundations test. Yes, a 6-dimensional political psychology test inspired by the works of Jonathan Haidt. So here you can see the 6 foundations: care, fairness, liberty, in-group, which is, I think, referring to in-group loyalty, especially there, purity, and authority. Let's see what it says in more detail about the test. Moral foundations theory, developed by psychologists Jonathan Haidt, Jesse Graham, and Craig Joseph, suggests that there are psychological foundations underlying human morality that are innate and universal to every civilization across history. According to the theory, people's moral judgments are based on 6 primary foundations: care, fairness, liberty, in-group loyalty, purity, and authority/order. These foundations represent evolved mechanisms that have helped humans navigate social interactions. Individuals, ideologies, and cultures each prioritize these foundations differently, leading to variations in moral values and beliefs. For the aforementioned reasons, Haidt's theory does not recognize any set of moral beliefs as being objectively correct or inherently superior. In this morality test, you will be presented with a statement, and then will answer with your opinion on the statement from a range of strongly agree to strongly disagree, with each answer slightly affecting your scores. By the way, side note, this is just one of the little things that irritates me, but affecting there, they should really go with the A spelling, not the E spelling. Whenever you mean affecting in the sense of influencing something, spelled with an A, not an E. Anyway, so that's the end of my grammar rant. I'll try not to rant about grammar anymore. Your final scores will be shown as a percentage for each foundation, along with an explanation of each foundation's broader meaning down below. There are 48 questions in the test. The average time of completion is 15 minutes. I don't know about you, chat, but I have a feeling it's going to take us longer than 15 minutes to get through this. I think 15 minutes is a little optimistic in my case. But we shall see. We shall see. I think it's totally understandable to not have arguments that would convince a committed opponent. The point of this theory, if we were to take its word, is that these moral differences are often irreconcilable and innate. Yeah, I think that's a nice way of putting it. And it seems right as far as it goes to you. There is just that part of me that always feels like, wouldn't it be great if there were arguments, though? Wouldn't it be great if these weren't just irreconcilable differences? But, of course, even if it's true that it would be great for them not to be irreconcilable, it doesn't follow that they're not irreconcilable. It could just be, like, maybe the truth of this matter is not what we would have hoped for. So yeah, I'm not sure where on that I ultimately stand, but I will say over the years it has come to seem more and more plausible to me that perhaps there really are just at some level irreconcilable differences when it comes to values. So chat, let us plunge in. Time to take the test here. And no copying off my answers, chat. If you're taking the test yourself, I want you to take it in fullness of your own answers, your own thoughts. A 6-dimensional political psychology. Okay, that's the headline I've already read. Ooh, question number 1. It is morally wrong to mistreat one's own body or live unhealthily. This is a good one to start with, because I think this is a question that divides a lot of people. My answer is agree. In fact, I'm wondering if I should pick agree or strongly agree. I'll just go with a regular agree on this one. Because it seems to me that the most elegant, the least gerrymandered view of morality is that morality takes everyone's well-being into account, including your own. It's like if we should respect others, it just seems to be a natural extension of the thought that we should also respect ourselves. Or one should also respect oneself. And I think part of that respect for oneself is to avoid mistreating oneself. You know, don't treat yourself in ways that you would refuse to treat others. So that it extends to things like, you know, mistreating one's own body, as in the wording of this question. And also, I think, to a certain extent, living unhealthily. Now, that's not to say that I think that one is always morally obligated to live like Brian Johnson, basically, and like health max like 100%, and like that's the whole basically focus of your life. But still, it does seem to me that there's a certain minimum, a certain threshold one should reach. And so yeah, I have no problem saying that, for example, behaviors like smoking are immoral. I think that it's more moral not to smoke and to mistreat one's body in other ways like that. I think the questions occur in a set order and aren't randomized. I see. So maybe this is the first question for everyone then who takes this test. I feel the same way. Perhaps we can explore once you've gotten your results. Yeah, I know that would be... I'd love to talk about this more. Oh, also, below VTuber, welcome. Welcome. And tell me if I'm saying your name wrong too, but I think it looks like it's below VTuber. Or maybe it's Bella... VTuber? No, below VTuber. I think there's probably some disagreement in this on the part of care ethics. Possibly. So for my understanding of care ethics, it would be almost like a subset of virtue ethics, or at least have lots of parallels with virtue ethics. But focusing in particular on the virtue of care, and especially as it shows up in caring relationships, for example, between parents and children, and using that as a basis for understanding ethics more generally, I would want to say that a care ethicist could perhaps agree that one ought to extend that same care to oneself. Like maybe it's not just care for others that we should have, maybe it's care for oneself. At least I know that's what I would say if I were a care ethicist. Rhymes with hello? Okay, Bello VTuber, okay. Well, hello, Bello VTuber. It's great to have you in the stream. So yeah, I'm Axaeon, and I'm a philosopher VTuber, as you can probably guess from the content of the stream so far, if you have not already seen other parts of my channel. So I really enjoy doing streams like this where we get to talk about philosophy. To play devil's advocate, what about the argument that stopping people from doing what they want to their own bodies is anti-liberty? For the record, I also picked agree and find smoking immoral. I see. Yeah, so I think if somebody were to raise that argument to me, Tia, about, yeah, like stopping people from doing what they want to their own bodies is anti-liberty, I think I would agree with that. I would say that, yeah, we shouldn't stop people from doing things that are harmful to themselves, provided that they're not violating other people's rights. And I would just say that that, to me, is compatible with the thought that, like, they're still doing something wrong in mistreating themselves, but they have the right to do it. This is a distinction that I often come back to in my thinking on ethics, is the distinction between whether a person has the right to do something and whether that thing is the right thing to do. And I think these can come apart. So having the right to do something, on my view, is just for it to be the case that one ought not to be coercively prevented from doing that thing. Whereas it's being the right thing to do is more a matter of just like, is it morally permissible to do? So I know not everyone might like that way of carving things up, but at least if somebody were to put that line of thought to me, that's how I would respond to it. I think mothering / care ethics would advocate for caring at the cost of personal safety, right? Oh, I see what you're saying now, Bello. Thanks for that. That does help me understand the thrust of your comment a little bit better. Yeah, I mean, and I think that is also something I would agree with. Like sometimes certain duties of care, we might say, are binding on us, even if fulfilling those duties would pose some risk to our personal safety. Like there's the case of if a parent is out and about with their child and their child is suddenly attacked by someone, it seems plausible to me that the parent has a duty to step in and defend their child, even though it comes at the risk of the parent's own well-being, like the risk that the parent will receive some blows in the attack. So I think that that's right as far as it goes. I guess the key point that I would raise there is just that it seems like in those cases, the risk to one's own well-being is justified by some further factor. Like in this case, justified by some other duty or someone else's well-being. And so to me, it seems that that's compatible with the thought that there are still duties to oneself. It's just that these duties to oneself have to be balanced against duties to others. And so I think that that's something that a care ethicist could make sense of, and also people who are not care ethicists. I guess I see ethicists of all stripes as being able to accommodate that part of morality. At least I would like to think so. I've been lurking for a really long time. Oh, well. In that case, welcome and thank you for finally stepping in and introducing yourself. It's always good to hear from lurkers. Yes, lurkers should never be underestimated. It's one of my mottos. Okay, thanks for answering. Oh, you're welcome. Out of curiosity, would you apply that view to abortion regardless of your own views on it? Like, even if other people find abortion immoral, it doesn't necessarily follow that it shouldn't be illegal. With abortion, it's a little trickier because if the arguments against abortion are sound, then the way in which abortion is wrong would be by being akin to murder. And it seems like murder, again, I don't think that this is true necessarily, but like just if that's right, like if it's true that abortion is a form of murder, then it would seem that abortion is a severe rights violation, the kind that the law should prevent. Now, if one had an argument that abortion is something that falls short of murder, but like is still wrong in some other way, then I could see room for a view according to which abortion is wrong but should not be illegal. But yeah, it just seems to me that the standard anti-abortion arguments would make the wrongness of abortion the same kind of wrongness that's present in murder. Like what Tia said, would there be some cases where personal bodily harm is necessary for one's own virtuous / emotional well-being, right? Like strenuous labor or difficult procedures? True, yeah, I think one's own well-being has various aspects. That seems right. Like there's bodily well-being and mental well-being. Like those are probably the two major ones. Perhaps some areas beyond that. Maybe some would say there's a certain kind of spiritual well-being, perhaps, depending on what one's views of spirituality are. And yeah, it seems right that maybe attending to certain aspects of one's well-being might lead to decreases in other aspects of well-being, you know, depending on the case. So that's a thought that I think makes a lot of sense. And like particularly, like if one thinks that mental well-being or emotional well-being is the most important, then I could see room for arguing that one ought to be willing to take on at least a certain level of bodily harm if necessary for the sake of one's own mental or emotional well-being. You know, like that seems right to me too. I meant to say should be illegal help. Okay. No worries. Yeah, I think I understood the import of the comment. Like if you were to undergo surgical transition for the sake of gender euphoria, the recovery process would be considered strenuous. Yeah, that's one of those examples that divides people. I think most of the division on that example is not so much about the deeper principles in play, it's more of just about is is having a sense of, satisfaction with one's own body something that requires surgical transition in the relevant cases, or could the gender dysphoria be addressed in other ways? So in part, I guess it's maybe an empirical dispute between, broadly speaking, people who are more conservative on such matters and people who are more progressive. But I think if all parties to the dispute were to just stipulate for a moment that, like, for a given person, the only way they could feel happy in their body was to receive this surgical transition, then it seems to me many or most people in the debate probably would be willing to grant that, okay, yeah, then in that case, surgical transition would plausibly be the best thing for that person. I get what you mean, but it being murder is highly contestable. I find it much easier to argue that it's not analogous to murdering a live human, but still immoral, albeit in a lesser way. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm wondering what that lesser way might be. Now, I don't want to get sidetracked on this too much, but I do think it's an interesting question. Perhaps we'll have to talk about this more sometime later. Possibly the mistreat. The mistreat. So I feel like I might have already forgotten the context of that comment. Oh, like using the word mistreat? Like mistreat nomenclature is possibly debatable in terms of the emotional layer of the embodied relation between person and body. In terms of the emotional layer... I pressed enter too early. Okay. No worries. It happens to the best of us. Yep. But yeah, now that I'm reading your fuller comment, let's see. In terms of the emotional layer of the embodied relation between person and body. So it sounds like it's saying, like, maybe there's a sense of mistreating oneself in an emotional way. When it says in terms of the emotional layer, which I'm not sure. I mean, I suppose you could say there are ways of mistreating oneself emotionally. Like if you're the kind of person who talks to yourself in a very negative way, who's always thinking negative thoughts of, oh, like I'm a failure or I can't do anything right, then maybe that would be sort of mistreating oneself in an emotional way. I'm not sure I fully see the connection of that to the previous example, but perhaps it could be drawn out a little bit more. But yeah, just in general terms, it does seem to me that mistreating oneself on an emotional level is possible. Good point, Bello. I think the question on screen is describing bodily harm that doesn't lead to some long-term benefit. It's mainly self-destructive or for short-term gratification only. Yeah, that's how I tend to interpret a question like this. So I think you're right about that. Sorry, I've been thinking about Karis's video a lot, you see. Basically, destroying an acorn isn't the same as chopping down a plant that's sprouted. You know what I mean? Yes. That does seem right. And I can also see, like, circumstances in which certainly chopping down a plant, like especially if it's a plant that belongs to someone else, would be bad. And maybe destroying an acorn would be somewhat bad, but, not quite as bad. So I can somewhat see the parallel there. Like a bodybuilder would say treating your body well is very different from that of a doctor because the goal would be different, right? Oh, yeah. So maybe what it means to treat one's body well can depend on the context, depend on the goal in a certain way, in terms of the client's goals and pursuits relating to their body. Yeah, that does raise the question of, is there a single set of standards that's the objectively correct set of standard for treating one's body, or the objectively correct set of standards when it comes to something like health? Yeah, I don't know if I have a settled view on that, but it does seem to me like a plausible starting point would be just whatever way of treating one's body leads one to live the longest, or to have the longest life and expectation. Not sure if there would ultimately be counterexamples to that, but it does seem to me like that's at least a plausible starting point for thoughts like this. So chat, that is the first question, and okay, it looks like we've only spent about 30 minutes on question number 1. I think there are 48 of these. At this rate, how long? It's going to be a 24-hour stream chat at this rate. Wow. So go ahead and strap in, get some snacks ready, because we're in this for the long haul here. Question number 2. Men and women should have equal access to the same opportunities. I don't know. What do you think, chat? Like, it sounds plausible when you put it in the abstract, but then on the other hand, like, should women really be allowed on the internet? I might have to go with strongly disagree on this one. Okay. Question number 3. Should be considered unacceptable for leaders to negotiate with people you would personally consider as terrorists. Or actually, maybe I should revisit question number 2. So, to be real for a bit here on question number 2, yeah, should have equal access to the same opportunities. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that I immediately think yes, but then the philosopher's brain in me starts to wonder, like, okay, are there potential counterexamples that even like a relatively progressive-minded person would be inclined to accept? Like here's an example. Let's imagine that we're making a biopic about who's a good feminist icon? Susan B. Anthony, let's just say. Like, we're making a film about the life of Susan B. Anthony. It seems fair to me to say that when we're considering which actor/actress should star in a film like that, which actress or which actor/actress should play Susan B. Anthony, like, we should restrict our consideration to women. Like, it seems like if we have someone who's a man playing her, I just and like let's say like people like objected, like, or like, hey, shouldn't we get like a woman to play this role? I could, you know, that seems to make sense to me in a way, but then I wonder, like, should it, you know? Should I feel that way? Like, if the choice of playing Susan B. Anthony is between, like, who's an actress? Do I know any actresses? Damn it, I don't know if I do. Scarlett Johansson. Okay, she's an actress, right? And on the other hand, Brendan Fraser, like, is the other one. It was easier for me to think of actors than actresses. Like, if it's between like Scarlett Johansson and Brendan Fraser, I want to say like we should go with Scarlett Johansson over Brendan Fraser to play Susan B. Anthony. But maybe I'm wrong in that, you know? Maybe I just need like more of an open mind on this one. So on that one, I think I'm ultimately going to say either agree or strongly agree. But there are certain like rare cases, and one could apply the same thing to race too. Like if we're going to have, like, if we're making a film about Nelson Mandela, seems like the starring role should probably not go to someone who's not black. I don't know, it just seems kind of commonsensical. And of course, in that case, you could say, well, you know, maybe there are further like independent reasons why many would consider it offensive for a non-black actor to wear blackface and portray Nelson Mandela. Of course, you know, we could have it be a non-black actor who doesn't wear blackface, and maybe it's just like a white person who's just playing Nelson Mandela, like without any makeup or anything. I guess that would be like a ridiculous or offensive in a different way, some would say. You know, some would argue that. But yeah, I think apart from maybe rare cases like that, though, it does seem to me that, yeah, opportunities should be equal between genders, between races. There's just only certain opportunities where it's where the gender or race is very directly relevant, I guess you could say. Men should get C-sections? Oh. Maybe we should. Maybe we should. Maybe it would help with empathy. Empathy for what women, or at least what some women go through in the process of giving birth. Canceling acts? Oh no. I brought it on myself, though, to be fair. Scarlett Johansson, she's an actress. Okay, yeah. That was the best example I could come up with off the top of my head. I'm sure I could think of others if I put some more thought into it. Probably even given the opportunities, they would be evaluated based on performance/capabilities, right? Like Ryan Gosling, Black Panther, would just be bad at the job. I don't know about that. I mean, I don't know much about Ryan Gosling, so I can't, and I've never seen Black Panther, so I'm in a way like one of the worst positioned people to address that example in particular. But I would want to say, like, it's easy to think of, at least in the abstract, cases of an actor who would do like as good a job as anyone reasonably could be expected to do at playing a certain role, but like they're just not the right race for it, or they're just not the right gender for it, or just not the right age for it. Like when it comes to acting jobs, it seems like demographics can be relevant in a way that they're not for a lot of other jobs. I clicked strongly agree because I was just thinking of general cases and not exceptions, like the ones you came up with, but like barring relevant differences. Yeah, which makes me wonder if part of what divides people on this question is maybe just how wide the range of those relevant differences are. Like, we might all agree in principle that opportunities between men and women should be equal, barring relevant differences. But for some people, the range of that category of relevant differences might be very small. Whereas for others, they might view the relevant differences as being a very large category, like one that applies to many jobs. I think that that's something that seems plausible for what divides the thinking of a lot of people on this question. Scarlett Johansson is super relevant to this question, though, right? Because she's in all of the Asian roles. Oh, she is? I didn't know about that. But I guess that makes the example even more fitting, is that if there's already controversy about her in connection to this. When you said the C-section thing, I immediately thought of my gynmate Karis's impreg fan art. You know, chat, I was not expecting the impreg fan art to make an appearance here in this stream. But now that we're here, we might as well roll with it. Yep, there's impreg fan art of Philosophy. Now, indeed there is, yeah, particularly of one Karis Euphranor. So if you have not joined his Discord below, then and you're curious about what this fan art looks like, you can find plenty of it in his Discord. So yes, that one, I think I'm going to say agree. Question number 3, it should be considered unacceptable for leaders to negotiate with people you would personally consider as terrorists. I want to say this, the one I'm inclined to agree on, because even if it seems reasonable to negotiate in a given circumstance, just based on the features of that circumstance. Like, for example, maybe the terrorists have captured someone and they're demanding a ransom, and so we're considering negotiating with them to pay the ransom. If we think of it in longer terms, if we think of it in a longer term way, then we could ask, like, doesn't that just motivate terrorists to kidnap more people in the future if we're willing to negotiate with them in that way? Like, by refusing to negotiate, aren't we doing what we can to demotivate future terroristic acts? So perhaps that's true, perhaps it's false. I suppose to get a better sense of it, one would have to do a fair amount of empirical research on terrorism, which I have not done. So in view of that, I will just say agree. Unacceptable for leaders to negotiate with people you personally consider as terrorists. I was kind of thinking the same thing, but I feel like barring women from, say, leadership or manual labor roles because you don't believe women are smart or strong enough on the whole is wrong. Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that too. I think that when it comes to people who want women not to be in leadership roles or not to be in manual labor roles, very often the thought will be like, oh, like women's nature just makes them unsuited to those kinds of roles. And I would want to say to someone who thinks that even if that's true in general, which I'm not saying it is, but like if we just be as concessive as possible to the empirical views that they have about women, we would also, I think we could also pressure them by saying, like, aren't there exceptions? Like, it could be true, like maybe women in general are not suited to like hard manual labor, but aren't there still cases of women who might have more testosterone than the usual woman, or maybe even than some men? And if a woman like that wanted to do manual labor and like was such that she met the physical requirements of the job, Like, why should she be refused a role? So I think that's where I would ultimately go with that, is like, shouldn't we judge people as individuals when it comes to their qualifications? Like, even if one does think that there are certain, like, just on average differences between men and women when it comes to the relevant abilities. Because okay, I see that's your second comment here. Because an individual woman could still be qualified, and you should really leave it up to that. Yes, I think you said in a much more concise way the thought that I was getting at. So thank you for that. This was interesting because the formulation of an actor as a terrorist relies on an embedded perception of power relations. So maybe terrorist is just ipso facto people your leaders shouldn't negotiate with. Oh, yeah. So then it might become trivially true that we shouldn't negotiate with terrorists. Yeah, I'm not sure what the best definition of terrorist would be. I mean, I would want to say someone who uses political violence, or uses violence to achieve political goals. But maybe it could be just the set of terrorists is coextensive with the set of people we shouldn't negotiate with. Interesting question for further thought. Question number 4. It is important for societies to preserve pride in their traditions and heritage. I like hearing you speak, though. Oh, thanks. It's especially nice when our thoughts happen to align. Yes. Well, thank you for the nice comment, Tia. I appreciate that. But yeah, for this one, let's see. Societies preserve pride in their traditions and heritage. I don't know. There was a time when I would have just put disagree on this one and just kind of left it at that. And I think I'm still overall inclined in that direction. Like, I don't think it's particularly important. And perhaps part of that is just reflecting on my own case as an individual. Like, when I think about the things that are most important to me as a person, like traditions and heritage and my country and so on seem like basically at the bottom of the list. Like, none of these things seem that important to who I am as a person. And so maybe there's just a sort of naive, simplistic extrapolation that I'm doing here. But I do want to say, like, I know some would make an argument for this just based on if a given society does not have pride in its traditions and heritage, perhaps that makes it more susceptible to being undermined by nefarious influences of various sorts. Maybe that... So I'm not sure where I was going with that sentence. Maybe that lack of pride in their traditions and heritage makes them more vulnerable to basically being invaded and colonized, even if not physically, then in a sort of cultural way by others. And if they do have pride in their traditions and heritage, perhaps that helps people to have a sense of civic responsibility. And perhaps it helps people to treat the commons, as it were, in a nice, good way that works well for everyone and helps reduce crime and so on. Again, I think a lot of this goes partly to empirical matters, which I have not done extensive research on. So it's difficult for me to say for sure on this one. I mean, there is a part of me that wants to say maybe it's the case that, like, if a society's traditions and heritage are good, then sure, they should have pride in them. But if the traditions and heritage are not good, then, like, no, the society should not have pride in them. Which feels like just a dodge of the question. There's something just so unsatisfying about answering it in that way. But nevertheless, that is how I'm thinking of it now. Because political violence can or cannot be sanctioned by the state, like Secret Service. They could also be considered activists and such, maybe. Oh, I see. Yeah, like, true. Just like if someone's a soldier in a war or in the Secret Service and so on, yeah, they would use violence in the service of the state, but it wouldn't seem right to automatically consider them as terrorists. So I think that's a very fair point there, Bella. Yeah, I guess the definition of terrorist is something that would maybe need a little more working in light of that thought. The disagree gives off edgy young hack space. I guess it does, yeah. If your food is good, then you should be a nationalist. If you're British, however, oh no. I wonder are there any British people in chat? It is true though, Billo, yeah, what you're saying, that I think compared to France and Italy, I think Britain has some catching up to do, you know, when it comes to the food department. But places like France and Italy, they know what they're doing, you know. They know how to make good bread. Like if you want to have a good croissant, you know, go on to France. Go to some of the bakeries. I think what I said is that traditions can be valuable and shouldn't be assumed to be obsolete because they're old, and or may be important to preserve because of that. But what you said was interesting. I see. Yeah, for this one, I think really the only way that I can go right now is just to say no opinion either way. To me, it seems to depend just a lot on what the traditions and heritage are. I'm going to try not to do this with too many of the questions, but I'm going to go with, yeah, no opinion either way on that one. Is wrong to treat someone differently solely based on their race, ethnicity, or caste? I'm inclined to agree. Now, I think there are certain examples one might give, and actually, if I click agree here, some might actually challenge me of like, okay, Axaeon, isn't this inconsistent with your earlier thought about how like choosing an actor to play Nelson Mandela, like you should probably go with a black actor? Like, is that not treating someone differently based on their race, ethnicity, or caste? Like, you know, excluding black actors from a role like that, isn't that an exclusion just, you know, based on their race? But I feel like this challenge seems tractable. It seems like there should be a good response to this challenge. And I suppose the response would be that in that case, perhaps it's not just the person's race that is the reason they're being treated differently. Like, at the very least, it's their race in conjunction with the race of the other person in question. So, like in this case, the race of Nelson Mandela. Like the race of whatever person they're being considered to play an acting job for. So maybe there are other factors that one could appeal to there. In the vein of that comment, when it comes to other factors, I'm thinking of cases, for example, like where some will say the race, ethnicity, or caste. I'm trying to think of the best example here to illustrate the point that I have in mind. So there are some who will say, well, look, if I'm alone on the street and, you know, it's kind of dark and I'm walking along and suddenly, like, walking in my path, there's a man, some people will say, well, isn't it reasonable to be a little more cautious when it's a man as opposed to if it's a woman, just given that most violence is committed by men? More controversially, some would say the same thing about race. Given certain crime statistics involving races, would it be more reasonable to have a certain level of caution depending on the race of the other person in question? And is that an example of treating someone differently based on their race, ethnicity, or caste? And on that one, I want to say, like, yes, I could see how, especially if we're looking at different possible worlds and, like, if we're allowed to make any stipulations we want about what social circumstances are like, it does seem like some level of a different response there could perhaps be justified. But I'm also not sure if those cases would count as, like, treating someone differently solely based on their race, ethnicity, or caste. Well, actually, it looks like gender is not included in this question. Interesting. It's just race, ethnicity, and caste. Because in those cases, it wouldn't just be their race, like, it would also be crime statistics and other things that are coming into the judgment. So yeah, I'm inclined to say, like, if the reason for treating someone differently is only their race, and it doesn't have, like, one can't even appeal to any kind of, you know, crime statistics or anything else, or different levels of measured ability, it's just race, then it does seem to me that that would be wrong. So I don't know if that's the way that most people would think of that question, but to me, the word solely is doing a lot of work there in how we approach that one. So in light of that, I would actually put strongly agree on this one. Not the X going to every bakery wall in France story. Yep, that's basically where this is heading. So yeah, Bello, if you're not aware, when I lived in France, I went to basically every bakery there. I loved the bakeries. Yeah, it depends, because as a Korean person, it's like my culture from aspect to aspect is a neoliberal instrument for international soft power influence, but also a familial and culinary tradition. Yeah, that's right. I think that what you're pointing to there, Bello, and also you, Tia, with your earlier comment about how Vietnamese food is amazing, but all of our other traditions need to go, is, yeah, certainly there's room for nuance here, and I think both of you are right that one can take pride in certain traditions and maybe not accept other traditions, not feel as good about certain other traditions. Because after all, no country is perfect. No country is perfectly good and no country is perfectly evil. I think for any country, one finds there are going to be some good aspects and some bad aspects. And the challenge is simply to try to hold on to the good while moving past the bad. Didn't think of that. It's interesting you say that, because I feel like conservatives would say that it's right to be scared of a black man but not a white man. But a liberal would say that it's right to be... Oh, I'm guessing how this comment continues is going to be something like... Oh, well, here it continues. A liberal would say that's right to be scared of a man, but not just because he's black. Yeah, I suppose so on that one. It's right to be scared of a black man, but not a white man. It's right to be scared of a man, not just because he's black. Yeah, I mean, I guess the main point I would make about that one is that it seems to me like even for the conservative there, the person who takes the conservative view, they could say that they're not feeling differently about the other person based solely on that person's race. But it's like that person's race in conjunction with, whatever statistics they might appeal to. So I think even a conservative, it seems to me, could say strongly agree on this question. Seems to me as though if you treated people morally according to the life experience, they would naturally be treated differently due to their race/subaltern experience. So treated people morally according to their life experience. Wondering how that might be cashed out. Like, I could think of a few examples. For instance, if we're considering someone's career experience, like maybe one person has more experience in a given field than someone else, and so the first person gets hired for the job over the second person. I guess that would be an example of treating people differently according to their life experience. So I'm not sure if that's the kind of example you have in mind, Bello, but yeah, some people naturally being treated differently due to their, as you put it, race/subaltern experience. Of course, in my example there, I wasn't thinking so much of race, but just experience in general. But perhaps there are cases that would involve a stronger racial component. Let's look at question number 6. Nobody should be denied the ability to reproduce, even those with serious inheritable diseases. At first, I just thought it was going to be like nobody should be denied the ability to reproduce, which I guess the rest of the question doesn't really alter that. It just sort of emphasizes it even more strongly by specifying that, like, hey, it includes even people with serious inheritable diseases. So yeah, deny the ability to reproduce. This one, I suppose I would probably agree with like 90%. Or I don't know. This one, I think there are serious costs to either answer. So one cost with just saying yes to this is that some serious inheritable diseases are so bad that plausibly a person who comes into existence with those diseases would be better off if they had just never existed in the first place. Like, coming into existence would be a harm for them. And here I'm thinking of something like Tay-Sachs disease, where the life expectancy is, if I'm not mistaken, something like from a few months to a year. So like the person is not going to live a long time. And during the time that they are alive, it's just going to be near constant suffering. And so I would be inclined to think that, like, yes, if somebody has the genes that make having that likely, then maybe should not be allowed to reproduce is a little bit of a strong way of putting it. But I would want to say there should perhaps be certain restrictions to ensure that whatever person they bring into existence will not have a disease like that. For example, maybe they use in vitro fertilization with PGD testing, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to make sure that whatever embryo is implanted, it will not carry the disease. Like, that to me seems like a reasonable measure to require in cases like that. But at the same time, I think that many people are very cautious, and rightly cautious, about the state being able to determine like who gets to reproduce and who doesn't, and will feel an almost instinctive aversion to any kind of interference from the state in as personal a matter on that. But still, when it comes to extreme cases like the one I was describing earlier, I'm still inclined to say, yeah, slightly disagree. I'm glad it gives us the example of slightly, or the response of slightly, because I think it helps allow for caveats like that. Well, I see I've missed a few comments by now. Like, if one person has experience being raised or casted by their given community in one fashion versus another, like a casted person within India versus a diaspora would have a different experience. Oh yeah, that seems right. Yeah, certainly those would plausibly lead to different experiences. Very much agreed there, Bello. Would the reproduction question apply to oneself? Like, if you wanted to not have children solely due to your genetics, would that be considered a moral wrong towards oneself? That's a good question, but I don't think it would be. Like, let's say that one would otherwise want to have children, but because of one's genetic profile, one decides not to. To me, that would be a very altruistic decision of, you know, thinking about others to such an extent that one decides to forego having children because of these genetic considerations. Though there could be a happy medium there. Like, maybe the right answer in that kind of case is just to do some kind of genetic testing, going along the lines of the example I was thinking of earlier, the example of in vitro fertilization with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Like, if that could screen out for whatever diseases one is concerned about, then one could potentially get the best of both worlds and be able to have a child, but without whatever horrible diseases one is worried about. He said, agree partly on the presumption that if someone's disease is that serious, they wouldn't be able to reproduce anyway. But in hindsight, maybe that was a cop-out, because someone could carry the gene for the disease without being afflicted by it themselves, but also eugenics. Yeah, that's what I was thinking earlier, is like, yeah, it might be a recessive gene, and maybe the risk of the offspring having it is just too high, perhaps in a given case, to justify having children. Oh, hi, Tylenol, welcome. Welcome. We're discussing some very deep, very foundational ethical questions about fairness and right and wrong and treating people differently versus treating people the same. So glad you could stop by. Now, on the last note about your earlier comment too, yeah, but also eugenics, I think it is important to make a little clarification here, which is that eugenics is one of those words that I think people can sometimes mean different things by. Very often when people use it, they'll think of, like, for example, the Nazis and like very coercive measures affiliated with various, you know, racist ideologies to ensure that people of disfavored races do not breed, or people with, you know, any mental handicaps do not have any children, and so on. And I think we could all agree that eugenics in that form is wrong. If we're thinking of eugenics in a slightly broader sense, though, like just the sense of any reproductive practice whatsoever that attempts to increase the presence of favored genes and decrease the presence of disfavored genes, like genes for various, you know, diseases that one might have, then it seems to me that there's nothing necessarily wrong with eugenics in that sense. Which I know you weren't saying anything about, so I'm not imputing any particular view to you here, but I think eugenics is one of those words that is sometimes viewed as a dirty word, whereas I think it is not always a dirty word. I think there's a sense of eugenics that is perfectly legitimate. I think also eugenics is so interesting because there's definitely a fundamental ethical specialness for applying to genetic reproduction. True, yeah, I mean, we could say, like, is it really that important to have children whose genetic profile matches one's own, or children who come from oneself, you know, so to speak? rather than just adopting. Certainly it's important to a lot of people that they have their own children, but it does seem to me like it's a difficult question to answer of like why that should matter so much. So yeah, number 6, I think slightly disagree. Just the one I go with there. So it is important for professional environments to uphold formality and diplomatic etiquette. What do you think, chat? Oh, Daisy Murphy, hello. Hi, Ax, and hi, chat. Hello, hello, welcome. We're discussing some deep ethical questions here in the Moral Foundations test. Yeah, for this number 7, I'm thinking to uphold formality and diplomatic etiquette. I kind of disagree on that one, I think. I mean, there's nothing, I suppose, wrong with that if that's the way a particular workplace wants to be. But also, like, I've been in various very casual workplaces, and it never bothered me. And I think that what matters most is just that the people involved respect each other and that they do their jobs well. And to me, that doesn't really require formality and diplomatic etiquette very much. Would you say that this question is very different from the question of should you smoke during pregnancy, right? Yes, I think the earlier questions about eugenics and so on are pretty different from that. And here's the reason. The reason is that during pregnancy, the embryo is already there, the fetus is already there. And so like if one smokes during pregnancy and as a result the baby, the resulting person, is born in a state where they're not as healthy, they have a plausible claim to having been harmed by you, by your behavior of smoking during the pregnancy. Whereas if, say, like a given person decides not to reproduce because they're worried about genetic diseases, then there's no person that's harmed in that case. Like the person who never comes into existence is not harmed because they were never brought into existence in the first place. Or like even if like let's say somebody is born and they have a certain genetic disease, but like it's not one of those horrible genetic diseases where we think like, oh, it would have been better for this person never to have come into existence. Like for example, maybe the person is born deaf, but like they're otherwise normal. And we might think, oh, like, this person will never be able to hear, but like they'll otherwise be able to have, whatever life anyone else could lead. In that case, it seems like we could also say this person is not harmed by having come into existence. Because the alternative is just that they would never have come into existence in the first place. And so it seems like it wouldn't have been better for them, if their parents had decided not to reproduce. So there is that issue of what's sometimes called the non-identity problem when applying our judgments of harm and benefit to cases like these. Is that which person we're talking about, and like when the case involves differences in like who gets to come into existence. I think those can be very ethically important. Now, this is very interesting because I used to work at a tech startup where informality and candidness was considered way more efficient. Oh yeah, I think tech startups are a great example of the kind of workplace where there's often a bit more of that casualness. That's interesting that it was considered more efficient. Yeah, I can see how there would be a plausible case to be made that it might be, at least in many cases, more efficient. I meant the question of who gets to decide which genes are more favorable if we open up limiting reproductive rights. Some people could think autism shouldn't be in the gene pool, others could disagree. Yeah, I have no doubt about that there would be some very divisive debates about it if this were opened up. So in light of that, yeah, a person might think maybe the safest thing is just to have the state completely hands-off when it comes to these issues, and that's an opinion that I respect. But yeah, otherwise, when it comes to things like autism, I mean, I'm trying to think, like, what would my view on that be? Like, if somebody proposed having some kind of restriction in place to ensure that the people who are born are not autistic, I would want to say if it's the more extreme cases of autism, of someone who's nonverbal and can't function, like, to me that sounds very reasonable, is wanting to ensure that the people who are born are not afflicted with autism to that extent. If they're the more functional cases, though, then I guess we get into debates about how, sure, like the people who are born might have greater difficulties in some areas, such as, you know, their relationships with others, but maybe they have certain strengths that help compensate for it. Like maybe certain kinds of focus or certain kinds of, I mean, many functional autistic people are incredibly smart. And so, yeah, it does get a bit dicier to say that you wouldn't, or to say that we wouldn't want people like that to come into existence. I agree with Tia because the standard for serious problems within genetics, I think, changes via the standards of the governing culture. Oh, like maybe if we started letting the state put any restrictions on reproduction, then maybe that would change our culture. And maybe as a result, we might be more open to, or we might become more open to putting further regulations on people's reproduction that maybe we would find unfortunate now. Yeah, I think that's a possibility too. But it seems as though what makes certain ends of the autism spectrum or specific disabilities, blindness, deafness, left-handedness, difficult to navigate is by societal design. I want to say maybe to an extent, but I don't think it's just societal design for a lot of those. Like the left-handedness one, I think, is the most plausible example. Of course, I'm not sure if I would know anyone who would consider being left-handed a disability. Maybe it was once considered that way, but I guess today we just think of it as a difference. But with things like deafness and blindness, it seems like there's something very definite, like a whole sensory modality that one could point to that the relevant people do not have. And so if someone is deaf, then sure, maybe they learn sign language and perhaps they can communicate with that. And that's a wonderful, beautiful thing that they were able to learn that and communicate with that. But we have to consider that, like, even someone who is hearing could also learn sign language. But a deaf person could not learn to hear speech and understand speech in the normal way that a hearing person would. So I think there's an asymmetry there where some opportunities are genuinely closed off to people with the relevant disabilities that are not just by societal design, but just by the natural, however tragic they may be, by the natural facts of the situation. Handedness is interesting. Yeah, I think so. Oh, also, hi, Viking Leo. Welcome to the stream. Whole family is left-handed, but my kid is right-handed. Oh, that's kind of the situation that I'm in. Neat to know that it parallels your experience, Viking, where I'm right-handed, but the rest of my family is left-handed. So kind of the odd one out in a way. Let's look at question number 7 here. Oh, wait, we already talked about that. Okay, I disagree. Yeah, this one I think is probably one of the easier ones. About uphold formality and diplomatic etiquette. Yeah, really not that important to me, that one. Yeah, personally, I believe power corrupts, so I'm definitely on the side of being hands-off with reproduction. I see. Because it's not just about what the decisions are, but who makes them. Right. We could always say, even if we trust a current government, or if we agree with a current regulation, we have to consider, like, what about the next government that comes along? Whoever is next in power might have precedent to take these regulations in directions that we would not approve of, such that maybe it would have been better not to have them in the first place. Yeah, that's a thought that is difficult to dismiss. Number 8, people should always strive to reciprocate any favor they willingly accept from others later on, even when doing so is not expected. Strive to reciprocate any favor they willingly accept from others later on, even when doing so is not expected. Yeah, this one I would kind of disagree. I mean, I think that it's often good to do this, but the always there, like, people should always strive, that I think is doing a lot of work, and that makes me a little more cautious. Because I'm thinking in particular of very minor favors that someone does you. Like, for example, let's suppose that you are in a restaurant situation, and you're both like splitting the bill, and just as a natural part of the course of things, your friend ends up paying just slightly more. Not because you've deceived them or anything, but like maybe they agree to take on the tip and like they just pay a few dollars more, and that's fine. It seems like in a way that's a favor, and like, yeah, you willingly accept that. You're like, okay, yeah, thanks for paying for the tip. But it might just be like such a minor thing that like saying like you should strive to reciprocate it. I would want to say like reciprocating it later would be like nice of you, but I don't think there's any obligation that you reciprocate it. Like if you just say thanks and then like leave it at that, and then like you just go on like being friends and you're just like in general a nice person to them and everything, like I feel like that's okay. I don't think there's any injustice in that. So that's why I would say at least slightly disagree, maybe regular disagree. Again, I do think depending on the size of the favor, perhaps they're like, if it's a really significant favor, if they go to a lot of trouble to help you and you accept it, it seems more plausible that that generates an obligation for you to pay it back in some way, to reciprocate it to them in whatever way you can. But yeah, for this one, I think I'm going to go with slightly disagree. Hour in on question 8. Oh, you're right. You're right. It is now an hour and 9 minutes in, and we're only on question 8. Yeah, I've heard philosophers have a way of being able to yap a lot, to yap to the very end of oblivion. I'm starting to think maybe that's true. Maybe there's something to that. Being the only right-handed person in your family is so insane. Act special. I know, it's just that special kind of circumstance. I don't know what made it happen that way, but yep, I have an unusual family in some ways, I suppose. Also, TP Ninja, welcome. Hello, good morning. Good morning to you, TP Ninja. 2 back-to-back Valentine's Days, but you break up in between? Sorry, I feel like I'm missing the context now of that one. I'm reading the comment too late. I'm sure I would understand it if I read it a few minutes earlier. I'm sorry, Bello. But yeah, I do like Valentine's Day streams, so next time Valentine's Day comes along, I'll try to do a further special stream. For this last Valentine's Day, Tia and I had our debate on the nature of love, so it's gonna be tough to gonna be tough / impossible to top that one, but I will try to think of something for next year. I remember having a lengthy debate with Chad about question 8, during which you're volunteering to buy me a Christmas in exchange for the stream alerts came up. I don't remember my verdict, just my senpai giving me a present. Oh, I see. Oh, the Valentine's Day is about question 8, reciprocating a gift once the context has changed. Oh, I see. So, oh, like somebody gives you, like your special loved one gives you a gift on Valentine's Day, but you break up in between, but then the next Valentine's Day comes along. Are you still obligated to give them a gift? That's really funny, yeah. I'd like to think that that situation has come up at least once before, and the person has given them a gift just to reciprocate. And then the person who received the gift is like, wait, what is this? This is weird. And then they feel creeped out at like having received a gift from this person they've already broken up with. Yeah, I don't know if that situation has ever happened, but I hope that it has happened at least once, because that's very funny if it has. I lean slightly toward agree since the size of the favor isn't stated. Yeah, the fact that the size of the favor isn't stated makes me think that, like, what about really slight favors? For this one, yeah. If the favor is slight enough. I guess it's that combined with the always that makes me inclined to disagree. But I respect your opinion, TP Ninja. So you might have the right way of thinking about it. And so Tia says, the Asian coded answer, I see. Maybe this is the real source of whatever divergence there is on this question. Is Asian coded versus not Asian coded? Maybe all philosophers should be VTubers? Hey, I'd love it if more philosophers became VTubers. I think being a VTuber is a wonderful medium to explore philosophy in. Next year could be maybe, can I reciprocate love / a human I love? Does love another person as a partner? Oh, yeah, that's a good one, TP Ninja. Maybe I'll have to do like a stream of seeing if I can get AI to be my girlfriend by the end of stream. Can I get ChxrryVT to agree to be my girlfriend? That'd be like a challenge stream. Yeah, I feel like the non-expectation of reciprocal favor might make it even wrong or discomforting to reciprocate in some cases. Very nicely put, Bello. But maybe keeping the peace could be considered an equivocal form of respect in the Asian sense. Yeah, like I like that way of thinking of it too. In some cases, maybe just, yeah, keeping the peace and not, you know, getting in the other person's hair if you expect that they probably would not want to hear from you again. Like maybe that is the best way of like repaying a favor in those cases. Question number 9. It is shameful to purchase something purely based on its luxury status or trendiness. So I do tend to agree that people shouldn't purchase things based purely on luxury status or trendiness. Shameful, though, is a bit of a strong word. I feel like that might be putting it a little too strongly. I might be inclined to use a word like imprudent. Though even there, you could say, like, if the person just likes luxury or likes having trendy things, then maybe it brings them enough enjoyment to have these things. And so maybe it becomes prudent after all, just because it brings them more pleasure, brings them more enjoyment. So I guess one could question even that. Considering your history with visual novels, I wouldn't bet money on it. Maybe so. How many visual novels have I read, though? I've read a few. I've read, like, Steins Gate is one that I quite liked, and If My Heart Had Wings. Those are two. Maybe I should do some more visual novels on stream sometime. Well, I guess Minds Beneath Us was a visual novel in a way. Just had maybe a little bit more in the way of gameplay elements than some others. I suppose you could say there's a continuum when it comes to visual novels in terms of gameplay. But yeah, chat, this is going to be slightly an aside, but if you think of any visual novels that would be good for me to play on stream sometime, let me know, because I'm always on the lookout. Meta AI does roleplay AI, so you'd find all the partners for every imaginable fetish. They probably heard it's a growing issue. Oh, yeah, people getting caught up in AI relationships. Yeah, what a time we live in. And yeah, I think that absolutely is a growing issue. Or when it becomes to such an extent that the person is neglecting real-life relationships, then yeah, I can see that becoming an issue, certainly. I think Q9 is also kind of a semantic issue, given that luxury status leads to social status. Yeah, it could be prudent in terms of keeping up appearances / respectability and dignified social / traditional events. I suppose so. Of course, in that case, I think if somebody is buying a luxury product for those reasons, they might say, oh, well, now it's not purely based on its luxury status or trendiness. It's based on this further reason, this further consideration about, like, how is this going to help me succeed? How is this going to help me gain the kinds of favor that I need from the people whose approval that I need? So I guess that's one way they might try to justify it in those cases. Like spending a lot of money on a gift for your grandparents. Oh, yes. Is that another Asian code example? I get the feeling it might be. But why do that when you could buy a Ninja brand ice cream maker? Good pistachios make pistachio ice cream. Ooh, that sounds great. Yeah, TP Ninja, if you ever make pistachio ice cream, let me know. Or how about if I ever make some, I'll let you know. Wait, I mean, dating sims, why did my brain swap that out to a WTF? Oh, definitely having an off week. No worries, Tia. Yeah, happens to the best of us. Yeah, with dating sim, I'm not the best at dating sims because I usually try to date everyone, and dating sims tend not to like that. That tends to lead to the you end up alone option. Or the you end up alone ending. But someday, chat, someday I will find a dating sim that is more in line. More in line with my preferences. Axe versus 10 Asians debate? Oh no, I'd get destroyed. Ninja and Bella, we need to band together and teach Axe about the Asian experience. Hey, I'm always open to learning. If you're curious, my roommate in college, for almost all 4 years of college, was Chinese. Yep, he was a student who came to the US from China to study. So I do remember hearing quite a bit about the Chinese experience from him, at least. But when it comes to other Asian countries, I'm not quite as familiar, I suppose. Shall happily consume any pistachio ice cream. Unfortunately, I lack both the ice cream maker and the skills for creation. I see. Well, yes, that could be an obstacle. But nevertheless, at least we can imagine it in the meantime. Maybe imagining it is enough. Confucianism stream. Oh, yeah. Hey, sign me up for a Confucian. I'd love to learn more about him. Number 10 here, question 10. Large societies need hierarchy and established leaders to function cohesively. Yeah, large societies. I mean, I suppose I'm inclined to maybe somewhat agree. Like, I feel like sometimes it might be easy to overstate how much hierarchy is needed. But arguably, there does need to be some. Like, at the very least, in terms of different levels of merit being recognized, and different levels of merit rewarded, in terms of, like, having the decision-making power, and things like that. Now, I don't think hierarchy should bleed into, like, everything that we do. But, yeah, I mean, we do need, I think, to a certain extent, leaders in hierarchy. So, I would at least slightly agree on that one. Maybe just regular agree, but I tend to be kind of a cautious guy with these things. So, I will go with slightly agree. Yes, Confucianism, the blessing yet cursed upon many Asian societies, from economic to social issues. Yeah, Confucius, now he was a big fan of hierarchy. I know that much. He was probably way bigger a fan of hierarchy than I am. So that might be one difference between Confucius and me. I know, in some ways, he was not the most progressive guy. Did not have the most progressive views on, like, you know, gender relations and things like that. Confucius sucks. Well, that's a very very concise way of putting your view on the issue. So, yeah, makes me wonder what he would say if he were around today. You know, would he have updated his views at all? Would he still be propounding the same principles that he did in the however many thousand years ago it was that he lived? It's really interesting. You say that, like, every East Asian country doesn't share cultural influences. So maybe you didn't pick up that much from him. Well, I acknowledge that they share cultural influences, just that I want to be cautious about assuming that simply because I know some facts about one country in the region that I know what it's like for every country in that area. So it was more of just a matter of trying to have some epistemic humility. I think I had the same answer as you for question 10. Oh, interesting, yeah. Oh, good. So you already know why Confucius sucks. Okay. I had a feeling your opposition to him might be based on something like that. Yeah. Some would agree with you for question 10, but that would be a reason for them to argue that large society shouldn't agree at all. Oh, shouldn't exist at all. Yeah, well, that would be a radical change, though, if there were no such thing as large societies anymore. Like, if we all went back to living in tribes. Return to monkey. Chat. This is it. This is the return to monkey. Maybe that's where we should ultimately end up again. Question 11. Casual sex between people who are not in committed romantic relationships should be heavily discouraged. Now, here is one chat where I actually do have a strong viewpoint. For a lot of these, I've been kind of going on the cautious route and saying, like, slightly agree or slightly disagree, or no opinion at all. But this one, I will go with strongly disagree. I think there is nothing wrong with casual sex. And in fact, I think it would possibly be a good thing if people had more of it. Especially from, like, what I hear about Gen Z. They're kind of not really, you know, doing much of that kind of thing. So, like, yeah, Gen Z, y'all need to, like, you know, get on it. The monkey philosopher. Oh, right. Yes, the monkey. Perhaps the monkey is the truest form of philosopher there is. But my phone, I wouldn't get to watch Axe's streams. Oh, yeah, if there were no large societies. It's okay, TP Ninja. Whatever tribe I'm in, you could just come to this tribe, and then you could watch my streams IRL. It'd be just like watching my regular streams here, but Just IRL instead of in the 2D anime avatar VTuber space. I'd give you a special invite. If we returned to Monkey, I wouldn't know X. So how about no? Fair point too. Yeah. If we all returned to Monkey, there would just be no... all the friends that we've made online, we would probably never have met. Yeah, it's kind of sad to think about. Confucius was so bad and awful in everything he wanted to do, but Neo-Confucian epistemology was super interesting, if I remember correctly. I might have to look that up after the stream. Neo-Confucian epistemology. Does sound pretty interesting, yeah. Dun dun. X makes a stand for question 11. That's right. Yeah, this is one that I am willing to take a strong stand for. Yeah, I don't partake in casual sex myself, but my answer was the same. Yeah, I think for question number 11, it seems like you would have to be really conservative about these matters to say agree. Like, especially because the question doesn't even just say discouraged, it says heavily discouraged. Well, I wonder what VTuber Axaeon stance on casual sex is. Well, now you know. Yep. Actually, it's more accurate to say that I haven't, not that I absolutely never would. Right. Yeah, sometimes these questions involve dispositions about, yeah, hypothetical situations, and they're not always exhausted by whatever circumstances are here in the actual world. So that's a fair point to bring up to you. How about question 12? It is important for families to stick together and uphold unity even when its members do not get along. Stick together and uphold unity. Now, I think this one I'm going to go with either disagree or strongly disagree. Because I will say, I've been blessed to have a very good family, but I know there are some people whose family life sucks, and it's through no fault of their own. Just they were tragically unlucky enough to have been born with bad parents, or bad siblings, or bad extended family, or what have you, whatever members of their family it is. And in cases like that, I want to say that it's perfectly fine to not put up a show, of liking each other. I think it's perfectly fine to instead, like in extreme cases even, like to cut contact and just think like, okay, these people are not good for me, these people are toxic, I need to distance myself from them, and so I will instead find people that I do relate better with, and maybe they can be like my new family in a way, or my found family. Like that to me seems perfectly reasonable. Is this a good time to say that I found your IRL philosophy work before I did your VTubing work, and then it took me a month to link 2 and 2 together? I think that is a good time to mention that, Bello. So thanks for mentioning that. It's actually really intriguing to me that you say that, because I don't think that is the case for many people. I think most people who are aware of my VTuber activities found me as a VTuber first. And there are a select few people who knew me just as an IRL philosopher first, and then started watching my VTuber channel, and then like might not have even realized the connection at first. But no, that is hilarious and wonderful that it worked out that way for you. So thanks so much for letting me know. I'm glad that the stars were able to align in just such a way that someone was like, hey, this Axaeon guy sounds kind of similar to a philosopher that I've read. His views kind of remind me of a certain contemporary philosopher. I wonder if there might be a connection between them. Excuse me while I put my tinfoil hat, but my theory is that Gen Z is undersexed because of endocrine disruptors in the environment. Yeah, it seems plausible to me that that's at least one factor. Yeah, I think with anything like this, yeah, probably that is, maybe that's even a major factor. I don't know enough about it to speculate very much, but I would not be at all surprised to know that that's one reason for it. My only concern would be from a sex education perspective, so I'd lean disagree. So long as handling STDs and such with the right medication or protection was known, it's fine. I see. That's right, yeah, but using proper protection is important, no doubt about that. Whoa, the anti-Asian answer to question 12, yeah. It's funny how the subject of like which answers are Asian coded or not has come up so much so far, but I did think about that when I read question 12. Is like, from what I gather, a lot of Asian cultures would go with an agree, or would tend to favor an agree answer to this one, even if various people from those cultures might individually disagree with it. So yeah, on this one, question 12, yeah, I got to give the anti-Asian answer for that one. Asians are rolling in their graves. I suppose that means Confucius. Yeah, Confucius is probably rolling in his grave right now, or whatever's left of him. Yeah, sorry, Confucius, on this one. Got to go my own way. Can't imagine what the moment when linking IRL and VTuber together must have been like. Yeah, it must have been a magical moment. Wish I was there for it. Thanks, Axe, for sticking up for people like me. I don't think it follows that you should automatically be loyal to a group of people you didn't get to choose, or just kind of bestowed on you. Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't want to say it out loud, but yeah, I was thinking partly of your experience there when I read that question to you. When I was 20, I read your work on Anarchist Library. Wonder what VTuber Axaeon thinks about casual sex. It's funny that that's how you first encountered the work, because yeah, I know that my first paper on the moral status of monogamy, yeah, someone uploaded it to Anarchist Library. I have no affiliation with that site myself, but I just thought it was funny that like, oh, like I guess somebody was inspired to put it on there, and apparently a lot of people who encounter my work, like that's, I guess, their first exposure to it, is that particular site. This chat is so educated. Oh, thank you, Mian. Yeah, that we are, we are an educated bunch. Yep. We look at things closely. We don't let much get by us. That's the kind of chat that we are. Someone who's reconnected with family after a really strenuous period of reconnection. I also think family can provide value, but it would suck if this were a morally relevant axiom. Yeah, good call, or good point there, Bello. Is that sometimes people can change, and even when there are strong initial differences, maybe people can eventually reconcile. I want to allow that there are cases like that. But I think I also agree with what you said. It would suck if this were a morally relevant axiom. Like, I think the existence of cases like that, in other words, does not mean that, as the question puts it, it is important, like with the implied, like it's always important for families to stick together and uphold unity, even when its members do not get along. Yeah, I think in those cases, one just has to use one's own judgment for whether reconciliation will be possible, but in some cases, it won't be, and I guess that's just one of those tragic factors of life. Oh my god, I just looked at your profile. You have a Substack. This is frying me. I love Substack. Oh, well, feel free to check it out. Yeah, I like Substack too. Although, since becoming a VTuber, I have admittedly found it kind of difficult to balance Substack with VTubing. Like, more of my attention, I think, these days goes to VTubing and planning videos and streams and, like, scripting and editing and things like that than to writing Substack articles. My hope, though, is to find more of a balance pretty soon and actually start writing more Substack articles. Maybe, like, one every 2 weeks or so, rather than just like, one every like 2 months or so, which is my current rate. Anarchist Library is the oddest Axaeon discovery pipeline. Odd, yeah, odd, but like magical in its own way. I'm so happy that people have discovered me this way. So, chat, I'm thinking question number 13 here. A society imbued with divinity, belief in religion and or spirituality, is preferable to an atheistic one. Yeah, this is one of those other ones where people who know my own atheism will probably not be surprised to say that I strongly disagree. Now, that said, I know there are atheists who think that even though there is no God on their view, like they might think that belief in religion for the common people is important, and maybe it leads to a more cohesive culture or a better culture in certain ways. I'm not very sympathetic to that view myself. I think I tend to prefer an atheistic culture. Now, with the caveat that, like, I have nothing against religious people, and indeed I know many religious people and am friends with many and so on. And so, like, whenever somebody is openly religious or openly spiritual, like, that certainly doesn't bother me. But I also think that it does not harm a culture at all to be more atheistic as opposed to more religious. I also make academic content and agree it's so hard to keep up with my art passions and academic passions. That's neat, Mian. Mian. By the way, if I'm mispronouncing your name, let me know. It looks like it's Mian. But Yeah, I'd be curious to hear more sometime about your academic content, and it sounds like you do art too. Yeah, I can imagine how balancing academic with art stuff would be particularly tricky. I like that, by the way, people are having this side conversation about like how blown Below's mind must have been upon discovering that that the VTuber versus me, the IRL, like they happen to be the same person. Yeah, I think you're the first person I've encountered, Bello, who has discovered me that way. Although in terms of 12, when it comes to estrangement, it's probably on the onus of the family members to not estrange their children to begin with, actually. Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, when you have kids, that includes various obligations to them. And yeah, not estranging them is one of them. Like, unless the kids do something like really awful, like let's say I had a kid and then later in life, like they became a serial killer. I think then I would be justified in kind of just not having anything to do with the kid after that. But yeah, barring extreme cases like that, I would want to say that parents should ideally have a policy of like, the door is always open. Question number 14. When raising a child, it would be preferable for them to end up kind and lowly than successful and cold-hearted. This one, I think, strongly agree. Yep. Kind and lowly all the way. I mean, being successful is great, but if it's at the cost of one's soul, at the cost of being cold-hearted, then that is not a cost I could stomach. For me or for my child. I would not want that for my child any more than I would want it for myself. Is never justified to invade and militarily occupy another country that has not harmed or threatened another. That has not harmed or threatened another. Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, are there any cases where military occupation would be justified without harming or threatening, where the country being occupied is not harmed or threatened any other? Off the top of my head, I can't think of any examples where it would be. So I'm inclined to say agree on this one. Of course, whenever you have a statement like it is never justifiable, there's always the worry about like, are there counterexamples lurking in the bushes? But for my part, I really can't think of any counterexample at the moment. So feel free to suggest any, chat, if you think of some. But for right now, yeah, I'm thinking probably go with agree on this one. I've been thinking of pivoting / re-debuting in terms of educational content because my grad funding requires a YouTube video. Oh. Well, hey, making a YouTube video, I think, is a great way of sharing one's art or sharing one's creative endeavors or educational endeavors, whatever they are. So if you decide to do that, Bello, then I wish you all the best. I do think that would be such a cool thing if your VTubing activities could link up with your grad program too, in that way. Figured you say that for Q14. I think I answered the same, but I still respect you so much for that. Oh yes, for question 14. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that we align on that one. Yep. I think that's a very Tia-coded question. Yes, I'm on the same handle everywhere. Interesting enough. I also create content on nutrition sciences and public health, which are so different from art. So you're a person of many talents, it sounds like, man. I think that's awesome. Yeah, anytime a content creator is someone who can put out educational content about multiple areas in that way, I think that is so neat. Imagine your Oshi's video essay ends and it says sponsored by such and such university. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, there are at least, I think, 2 VTubers who are associated with, I think it might be Simon Fraser University or some university in Canada that have like official VTubers to like promote university events and stuff. I thought that was kind of neat. They're the only case that I know of, though. But I do predict that will become more of a thing in the future. Yeah, you know what else I predict for the future, chat? So I'm going to get a drink right now. Hydration break. Yeah, chat, make sure to stay hydrated. Take a moment to stay hydrated. That's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, phew, that's better. All right. Let's look at question number 16. Providing negative feedback to peers should typically be done sparingly and politely to not offend with bluntness. Well, it does say typically here, so that moderates it somewhat. Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree on that one. Yeah, to not offend with bluntness. Now, of course, I do think there are cases where bluntness is called for, but the question kind of allows that with the typically here. It does seem plausible to me that in just most normal circumstances, you know, the negative feedback, yeah, try not to overdo it, you know. I mean, I can appreciate bluntness when people are blunt with me, but, you know, there's also a place for compassion in the way that one delivers negative feedback. And so I think that that is where this is coming in here. Also, you guys get stream alerts for Axe if you join. So, oh, you're talking about your Discord. Yes, true. Tia was very nice and set up stream alerts for me. So, if you want stream alerts for Axaeon channel and for Tia, yeah, Tia's Discord is the place to be. 17. Certain punishments are so cruel and violent that even the most evil and dangerous individuals do not deserve them. Yeah, that one I think I'm also inclined to agree. This chat is so fun. I will be joining in from now on. Well, Mion, we will be glad to have you. The more the merrier, I say. Especially when it's someone with interests and talents like yours who does all the different things you mentioned. I'm sure you have a unique and interesting perspective to contribute. But yeah, for this one, I think that a disagree answer would just trouble me in certain... just imagining certain things. In fact, I'm not even sure if I want to describe them on stream, but I think I have a pretty vivid imagination, and some of the potential punishments I can imagine would be so extensive that I genuinely would not wish them on anyone. And part of that might just be because I'm not a retributivist, so I don't really think that there's such a thing as deserving to be harmed. I think that sometimes punishing people can make the most sense just for the sake of perhaps deterring certain behaviors, or in the case of incarcerating people, maybe it's for the sake of protecting normal law-abiding citizens from their presence. Like if it's a particularly violent person, a person disposed to violence. But none of those rationales for punishment would be that the person deserves it. It would just be like, how do we most help other people? How do we most deter these kinds of behaviors? And so it does seem to me there are certain limits in what kinds of punishments we should be willing to inflict. For example, perhaps incarceration is on the table, but, well, yeah, I don't know if I want to get too specific with the punishments that I don't think we should have, but it does seem like the cruel and unusual category and the law, I think, is a very important part of our law, that we're not willing to inflict cruel and unusual punishments. For example, we don't rape rapists. Like, we don't subject rapists to be raped. And that seems to me like a good feature of our law system, that we don't have punishments like that. So on 17, yeah, I'm inclined to say agree. I think I said disagree, but I'm fine with us disagreeing on question 16. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you disagree for question 16. I could see that as being a disagree question for you, Tia. But yeah, also, it feels to me like this one is maybe a bit less foundational than some of the others. But yeah, 17, definitely agree. Oh yeah, TP Ninja, you were giving a good example there. Oh yeah, the one where they cook you in a bronze bull is pretty messed up. Yeah, like I would not sentence anyone to that. So I think that is a perfect example. I think this is a personal ethics. I'm sure it's been addressed in ethics before, but for 17, I'm of the opinion that regardless of anyone needing to be punished, nobody should be made a punisher. It's an interesting point too. Like if we're hypothetically sentencing someone to be tortured, wouldn't that require that someone be the torturer? And is that something we really want to put anyone in the position of? So yeah, neat point there. I think you're right about that, Bello. Agree is the justice coded answer for question 17. Yes. Society should encourage children to be fully obedient to their parents and defer their decisions until they reach maturity. That one, I'm going to say... Yeah, the fully obedient worries me a little bit there. If it were something like generally obedient, I might be a little more prone to say agree. But fully obedient, I think, is a little too strong. Defer to their decisions until they reach maturity. Yeah, I mean, I think something like that would work in the case of parents, many people's parents, but then there were like other people's parents who just suck. And of course you could say like maybe this is just about like what society should generally encourage and not like in every case. But still, just in light of all the people out there who do not seem to know much about parenting, I want to say disagree. I think that very often children are more competent than we give them credit for. More competent to direct their own learning, for example. I think that our evolutionary heritage has given us the natural curiosity, the natural ways of learning, that if we just trusted children more and didn't try to interfere with their lives so much, they would in general make much better decisions than we give them credit for. So yeah, 18, I'm going to say disagree. 19, there is no end goal noble enough, no circumstance desperate enough to ever justify directly sacrificing the lives of unwilling innocents. This one, an agree answer, I think sounds very nice in theory, and I think is rhetorically very powerful. Saying like there is no goal noble enough to justify this. But ultimately, I think I have to click disagree on this one. No circumstance desperate enough to ever justify directly sacrificing the lives of unwilling innocents. Yeah, I'm thinking of cases like here's just a hypothetical case where I think it would be justifiable to sacrifice the lives of unwilling innocents. Is imagine that there were powerful aliens who were intent on blowing up the entire Earth. And suppose that they had captured like a few humans to probe, to use as test subjects, and the aliens are there in their mothership, and they're planning to blow up the Earth. And suppose that we can destroy the aliens, like we have a super secret, ultra powerful missile that we've been working on, and we can launch it at the mothership now and destroy them. It's our last hope of destroying them, or they're going to kill everyone else. Now, of course, if we do that, the few people they've captured on the mothership will be killed as well. And in these we'll just imagine these people are unwilling, like they would not want to be killed. It seems to me like we're still justified in launching the missile at them and destroying the aliens to save the rest of humanity. So that is briefly why I would pick disagree on number 19. Also, arguably the trolley problem, at least in the first variant of it, where it's like let the trolley go down the tracks and kill 5 people, or divert it to where it kills only the one person on the alternative track. Some would say that's arguably a case where sacrificing the lives of unwilling innocents is justified. But I think the aliens case is a more extreme example where it's really hard to deny the judgment that sacrificing them is justified. So, but in the words of Tia for question 18, Tetia for question 18, I hate adults who treat children like objects. Yeah, I hate that too, TP Ninja. So I think that that is well said. God, I had such a long debate with chat about this. Someone asked, okay, what if aliens? How did you have the same example? Yeah, little known philosophy trick, chat. You can use it if you're ever trying to think of a thought experiment and you're not sure what to go with, but like you're looking for an extreme example, just go with aliens. It makes things so much easier. One of my favorite tricks for finding nice, good, applicable thought experiments. But yeah, it is kind of funny that we had the same example on that one, Tia. I guess our thinking just aligned on that one. Does this mean Axe is Tia coded? At least when it comes to thinking of aliens in thought experiments. Yeah, it seems like very much so. This is probably the question most annoying critical theorists like me would be like, if you were a military commander, you would pick agree. If you were a service worker, you'd pick disagree. Yeah, I would find that a kind of annoying thing if somebody said that. Because I would want to say, well, wait a minute. If I was a service worker, I could still... It's not like my thinking would be entirely determined by my job. I think sometimes people's thinking, or very often even, people's thinking can transcend whatever material circumstances they find themselves in. But yeah, I think that it is, I guess, something that, yeah, critical theorists, I could see them saying that. Ax, did you study philosophy in university? I did, yes. Yes, I was a philosophy major, and then I went on to get my PhD in philosophy. That's right. Took a philosophy class once, and aliens were mentioned every class. It's true, yeah, I'm not the only philosopher who uses the alien strategy when it comes to thought experiments. That's funny that aliens were mentioned every class. So yeah, 19, disagree. Number 20, responsible citizens who are not members of the military or police force should have legal access to basic firearms for self-defense. Chat, do you hear that? I think I just heard an eagle call in the background. There are sounds of the American flag waving where I am now. Strongly agree. My Americanness is showing here. Actually, maybe I should go with just like regular agree on that one. Let's see, who are not members of the military or police force should have legal access to basic firearms for self-defense. Yeah, I'll go with just regular agree on that one. Hi, oh, hello, Jinx. Hello. We're considering the answers to some very deep moral questions here. Nice to see you again. Are you really a philosopher if you don't drink XYZ water? Oh, you know, below, I think this might be the first time Twin Earth has made an appearance in chat. So that's nice to have Twin Earth mentioned. Yeah, XYZ water. It's another one of those classic philosophy thought experiments that gets brought up a whole ton. I'm a different count because my normal one ain't working. Okay. I hope you're able to get your normal one working soon. I can feel the founding fathers inside me. That is one of those sentences that I'm not sure should ever be uttered. But now that it has been uttered, Kale, well said is all I can say. Well said. I wouldn't say Ax is Tia coded, just that we have similar values in a lot of areas, and that's part of why we're such good friends. Okay, yeah, that's a nice way of putting it, I think. For 20, I think there's an argument to be made that either no one has guns or everyone has guns, predicated on the fact that a police force exists with guns. I would agree, I see. Nicely nuanced view there, that, yeah, maybe it depends on how armed the police force is. But yeah, 20, I'm inclined to just say agree. But yeah, I can see how, like, if the police force does not have guns, maybe that makes a disagree answer a little more justifiable, at least, than it would otherwise have been. I just finished making an Ax in Tia Candy? Candy? Not sure what that is. Sounds like maybe it's a kind of art piece. By the way, Ax, under what circumstances did you handle a gun? That came up when I was streaming this, and chat wanted to know. Well, I guess I've grown up with guns for... Or I shouldn't say I've grown up with guns for a fair point, because that makes it sound like I'm still a kid, but I you know, grew up with guns, you know, from a relatively young age, and I wouldn't say that I've handled guns a whole lot. Like, for example, I'm not the kind of person who has ever gone hunting or anything like that, but like I have plenty of friends who have. But yeah, I mean, I've been to like shooting ranges several times, you know, and yeah, that was the one question when I was teaching in France. This is the one question that students were always interested to ask me, is like, oh, do you have guns? Like whenever I would tell the class, because I was like the English teaching assistant there, and sometimes the teachers would say like, okay, class, now is your chance to ask them like questions about living in America. And like the number one question everyone always had was like, what about guns? And then I'd be like, oh yes, like yeah, I have guns like my family does, like, you know, they've been in my family for a long time. And then someone would be like, oh, is it kind of like part of the culture, like the family gun? And I'd have to be like, oh, well, like actually it's like family guns, but yes. Yes, I'm embodying all the stereotypes of being an American here. I also agree with your answer for 20. I think there is so much unpredictability in America, people have to be prepared for whatever. True. Oh, it's like making things from beads. I see. Well, if you ever want to join either Karis's or Tia's Discord, Jinx, then you could share that art if you feel inclined to do so. And I know that I and many others would be curious to see it. Well, this may be strange because I come from Singapore, but this is a hard disagree. Oh, yeah, Singapore, I guess they have some pretty strict rules on this stuff, don't they? I don't think even off-duty military personnel, police officers should have guns in their homes. Wow, it does sound like a pretty strong disagree. And you might be right to think that, TP Ninja. You might well be right. I realize this is a complex debate. So, I think that it's just one of those areas where... Could perhaps do a stream on this sometime, like a full stream just on this question. I think that would be interesting. Maybe I'll have to do that in the future at some point. OMG, the French children asked him about guns. Yes, they did. They were super curious. Yep. X, if I don't respond, just know that my headphones are broken. I can't hear a thing you're saying. Oh, okay. Sorry to hear your headphones are broken. But no worries about that. TFR next year will be in a debate and Axe will ult by pulling out a clock. I guess that's one way to win a debate. Or maybe lose a debate, depending on how you look at it. Yeah, not that I would ever do that in a debate with someone. Unless it was maybe like, you know, just in like let's say that the other person makes a really good point and I want to celebrate it so badly that I just put a gun, like start firing in the air, like, you know. Actually, I wouldn't do that either, but... Kind of funny to imagine. He's smart if he doesn't. We're anime characters and so oh yeah, swords beat guns in anime, true. Me when I'm a hard-boiled conservative who hates guns because it makes killing too easy. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Oh, okay. So we are going back to swords, I guess, on this one. Sounds like multiple commenters here in chat are in favor of killing up close. Making it more visceral, going the sword route. I see. I think I could argue both sides, really. Yeah, on this one, I think being able to argue both sides is important, and it is one of those issues where I think being able to argue both sides is somewhat feasible in a way it might not be for things that are arguably more controversial, or not more controversial, but more foundational, I would say. For reference, the only gun violence case we've had in Singapore as of late is someone illegally trespassing a shooting range in a military zone and getting hit during a firing practice. Wow. Well, if that's the only gun violence you've had, then I suppose Singapore's doing pretty well on that metric. Gun violence is practically zero, making it a lot easier for de-escalation, I see. That's interesting. I've never been to Singapore, but I've had some friends from there. And I know that the university there is quite strong in philosophy. Philosophy 201 samurai versus aliens. Oh, the samurai might have a tough time if they're fighting aliens. Though I guess it depends on which aliens. Question number 21. Those who have earned large amounts of wealth should be obligated to provide some of it towards public welfare and or less fortunate members of their society. Yeah, should be obligated. I'm not sure if we're supposed to read that as should be required, like the state should force them, or if it's just that like they have a moral obligation to provide some of it towards public welfare. I'm a little more sympathetic to the thought like they just have a moral obligation than that they should be required by the state. But let's see, should be obligated to provide some of it towards public welfare and or less fortunate members of their society. I'm inclined to say slightly agree. I think it's easy to take this kind of view too far. But one thing we could say here is that those who have earned large amounts of wealth, arguably they had access to opportunities that other people might not have had, and so perhaps that is the basis for at least some obligation to give back, so to speak. Not sure if I would go farther than that, but yeah, at the very least, to slightly agree on this one. So do you acknowledge that you're not the strongest, that you're the strongest philosopher VTuber now, especially since neither Karis nor I know how to use a gun? I mean, knowing how to use a gun is one thing. I don't know if that makes me the strongest, though. Like, if someone's about to fight me and I just pull out a gun and settle it that way, and then I turn around and say, hey, I'm the strongest. Like, to me, it feels like that's cheating. Whereas if it's like an actual, like, just legitimate fist fight, somehow that feels fairer, you know? Like, I would feel like I've earned the right then to say I'm the strongest if I were to win a fight that way. Wait, we have strong philosophers? This is the first time hearing of it. Help, yeah, it's not part of the stereotype of philosophers to be strong, but as Bello says, yeah, Plato was a wrestler, so Plato is one of the, you know, one of the all-time greats. So if he was strong, then yeah, maybe there's more of a reason to think more philosophers should be wrestlers. Yeah, Plato needs to make this a trend here. We need to follow in Plato's footsteps. Kind of agree on this. I agree that wealthy people already do that enough, and that's why America is a capitalism society. Yeah, I think so too. I think sometimes views to the effect that wealthy people don't, do anything for the public welfare are sometimes exaggerated. So I'm on team disagree on question 20, because basically what Ninja said, the question might as well be, are you American? Oh, on the firearms question. Perhaps. Although plenty of Americans disagree too, but yeah, I see the point you're making too. I'm in reference to Singapore having strong philosophy. Oh, I wasn't aware there was even a philosophy course present in our universities here. Yeah, I think National University of Singapore, like one of my colleagues from grad school went on to teach there, and at least one of their philosophers came to give a visiting talk at my grad school when I was in grad school. And I think they've just done a lot of cool philosophical activity there in general. Proficiency weapons is part of strength though, but understood, I'll study jutsu in case you ever pull that Glock on me. Good to know, good to know. Question number 22. Pursuing the goal of raising a family and a career that helps achieve this goal is more noble than pursuing a child-free life path. I think I'm going to say disagree on that one. I think having children is a wonderful thing, especially if one takes proper care of them and helps give them the opportunities that they need to become flourishing adults. But also there are plenty of ways to contribute to the world without raising children. Like one might have a career involving philanthropy, and maybe one just devotes one's whole life to that. And to me, like, that seems just as legitimate as having children of one's own. Or maybe one is a teacher or a professor or someone else who works with young people a lot and helps influence many young people that way, but never has kids of one's own. I want to say that there's nothing less noble about that than actually having children. So yeah, 22 is going to be a disagree for me. Really partially due to conscription and the government's emphasis on preventive healthcare, our populace is pretty fit, hence strong in general, though. Okay, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. In those respects, yeah, Singapore really does seem to have it together. Wait, yeah, actually, Singapore is really strong in the humanities. Actually, their lit department, their media studies department is really strong. Okay, I didn't know that about lit and media studies there. But I guess since their philosophy department is strong, yeah, it doesn't surprise me to hear that they're stronger in the other humanities as well. Gee, I wonder what VTuber Axaeon thinks about the traditional nuclear family. I mean, hey, nothing wrong with it if that's what somebody has, but yeah, saying it's like the only, or saying that's more noble than the alternatives, that's where I would get off the boat. I also disagree with question 22 because there's no defined life purpose, in my opinion. No defined life purpose. I think on some interpretations of that, I would agree. I do think certain purposes are better or worse than others, but I suppose it's a matter of personal choice which purpose one chooses. So in that sense, I would agree. I forgot what answer I put down for question 22, but I said that while having children is a noble goal for some people, it's an opportunity cost, and they'll contribute more doing something else. Yeah, I mean, that seems right. Like, especially if it's someone who just, like, doesn't want to have kids, then, like, if they were to actually have kids, that would probably just drag them down and hinder them from doing whatever else they might be doing to contribute. And so, like, that just wouldn't be a good situation for anyone involved. Question 23. Citizens should never be denied the right to non-violently assemble and protest in public spaces, even when it is likely to progress into rioting. So even when it is likely to progress into rioting, that part makes it a little bit trickier. Yeah. I think the nurturing of young people could be considered morally special because you're contributing to the moral foundations of another. Right, yeah, that's one thing that I think makes me especially inclined to put disagree for question 22, is that, like, even if we're just considering young people, there are ways to help young people that don't involve having children of one's own. So agreed on that one, Billow. But it's not exclusive to child rearing or raising a child, but could also qualify in terms of and forms of teaching. Yeah, very much so. I think we're exactly aligned on this. But yeah, for question number 23, likely to progress into rioting. I think I'm gonna go slightly agree. Although this one I could see myself being persuaded. Part of me wants to ask, like, how likely is it to progress into writing? How, like, so I said progress into writing, like, oh no. If this is gonna progress into like typing an essay, then that's where we have to draw the line. But yeah, like if the government is in a really good position to know that's likely to progress into rioting, then perhaps there could be limited restrictions, like temporary restrictions. So this one, maybe I should put no opinion either way. I actually really don't know if I have an opinion on this one. I mean, I am a little bit worried about trusting the government to implement restrictions like this, because I feel like it would be likely to be abused if the government were allowed to do this. But that's really the main reservation that I would have about it. Me, when I'm a parent, telling my children to never go into the humanities. What if you become a writer? I mean, pretty much, yeah. Question 24. Ensuring wrongdoers experience discipline through retributive punishment is an essential component of justice and ensuring the proper functioning of society. Yeah, this one, I think, disagree. I'm not a retributivist. I think there are rationales for punishment one could give, but to me, they don't have to do with whether the person deserves punishment. They have to do with things like protecting others, ensuring public safety. So 24, for me at least, is a pretty easy disagree. 25, protecting the public's right to privacy from surveillance and espionage should be a greater priority than using said tools to catch terrorists or criminals. Yeah, this one's tough because it forces us to weigh two different things. Public's right to privacy from surveillance and espionage. Using said tools to catch terrorists or criminals. I think I slightly agree, though with the caveat that I can see how there might be some situations in which a certain form of terrorism or crime is so pressing to deal with that maybe the government is justified in certain limited breaches of people's right to privacy. But it does seem to me like those would be the exception rather than the rule. So I'm going to say on 25, slightly agree. 26, although taste in art, architecture, and style is technically subjective, it is important that a society tries to uphold certain standards of beauty and sophistication. Yeah, and this one I think I'm inclined to agree. I think that there should be a certain minimum standards for things like beauty and art and culture, things that uplift the human spirit. I think that helps all of us be better, more responsible people and more responsible citizens. So 23, or 26, yeah, inclined to agree on that one. Question 27, lucky number 27. It is preferable for society to promote that people work through their mental health problems by talking about them openly, rather than by trying to hide and ignore them. This, I think, agree. I'm not going to say strongly agree necessarily, because I think it is possible to overdo this. Like, it is possible to make mental health problems worse by dwelling on them too much, by focusing on them too much, by making it to the point where one is kind of beating a dead horse about it. But at the same time, I think it's also very easy, maybe even easier, to just stigmatize them and try to hide them and ignore them. And I don't think that helps anyone either. So I think mental health issues are, nothing to be ashamed of, and people should feel free to talk about them openly. Just with the caveat that, like, one doesn't go so far as to make it one's entire personality, or to where it doesn't become trendy to claim, having certain mental illnesses, like having them as one's identity. I think that goes a little too far. But otherwise, for this one, I would agree. What about modern art? Well, modern art's a big category, and yeah, not all of it I could say I'm a fan of, but I do think for this one about upholding certain standards of beauty and sophistication, I guess at least some modern art would go into that. But perhaps I think it would include both modern and classical art, and maybe even some postmodern art too. So it would be a wide umbrella of art, just as long as it's sufficiently good art. Now, if you ask me, what is it that makes art sufficiently good? I'm afraid I don't know the answer off the top of my head. That is one that I would have to think about for a lot more. 26 also seems like an ipso facto, because whatever society values will be considered beautiful. So maybe the question is more so, is it valuable for society to express these things in terms of techne? Like, is it good to find things that are beautiful? Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, like whatever society values will be considered beautiful. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. It seems to me like there are many ways of valuing things, and sometimes a person might value something in one way while explicitly acknowledging that it's not an aesthetic kind of valuing. Or even if it is an aesthetic kind of valuing, it might not be by finding the thing beautiful. Like, there are certain kinds of art that depict very dark themes or intense suffering. Like, I'm thinking of art by like Francis Bacon, for example, where it's great art, but very few people, if anyone, would say that it's beautiful. And so like there's an immense degree of aesthetic value to the kind of art. In fact, maybe I could give an example right now. Like, let's just say if I were to go to Wikipedia and type in, this will be Francis Bacon's major work. So one of his major work, 3 studies for figures at the base of a crucifixion. So you can see this image here by Francis Bacon. And the first thing that I think of when I see it is that it's very tortured and very dark and also kind of scary. Like, this is the kind of thing that I could see somebody having nightmares about. So I would not say, like, there's no part of me that would call this piece of art beautiful. But nevertheless, it does seem like great art. There is something compelling about this, something fascinating about this piece. So anyway, how that ties into your question, I'll go ahead and get this off for something slightly more pleasant to look at. But yeah, it seems to me like, yeah, a society could value certain things without considering them beautiful. And I think even for quite a bit of art that is like explicitly a reaction against previous norms of art. And here I'm going to embarrass myself by showing how little I know about art, but think of the piece, for example, where it's just like a urinal. I forget what it's called, or even who made it. I think it was some French guy, but just like a urinal sitting on the ground. Like, that was arguably art, but I don't think the goal of that was beauty. I think the goal was just to like challenge like previous artistic standards. But anyway, that's all kind of a tangent. But yeah, I guess I would question that a little bit, whether anything a society values is considered beautiful. Oh yeah, Marcel Duchamp. That's it. Yeah, Duchamp. Oh yeah, this is not necessarily a traditional beauty, but I do think the sublime aestheticization of this is tied to a Christian expression so predetermined by finding it valuable, right? Oh yeah, you could say that it's maybe the sublime is one aesthetic category that one might give to certain pieces of art like that. We know it's called, oh, the fountain, I see. Ihuk? I might be letting that round. Ihuk is a postcard of the Mona Lisa with a mustache on it. Oh, okay. Not familiar with that one. I have to look that one up after the stream. But yeah, 27, I think, agree. 28, it is important for countries to pursue a level of economic and military self-sufficiency to avoid dependency on others. I mean, yeah, that one, I think, agree. Seems like, yeah, wouldn't it be most desirable for a country to avoid depending on others? Just as a certain kind of independence is arguably desirable in persons. Seems to me that the same holds true for countries. Like, isn't that the fairest thing, arguably, if countries can not have to depend on others? 29 is a sign of a deeply flawed society when someone can inherit a large sum of wealth or power without having to work for it themselves, while others inherit little to nothing. deeply flawed society. So this one, I can sympathize with the intuition that there's something unfair about this circumstance. That just by the random lottery of birth, some people are born into much easier circumstances than others. But on the other hand, insofar as these decisions come from just people deciding like they want to give their wealth to their children, then it doesn't seem like there's anything unjust about like a person being able to do that, being able to give their wealth to their children while there's inherent little to nothing. I mean, I guess one way you could try to reconcile this is say, like, yes, it's okay for there to be these disparities just as long as there's a sufficient social safety net to help the people who are not inheriting very much. So maybe that's the way I would ultimately be in favor of. But otherwise, for this one, I think I'm going to go slightly disagree. Because the alternative to having this kind of situation seems to me like a case of just not allowing people to give much wealth to their kids. And I think that would be just unreasonably interfering with people's capacity to make these decisions. That's why I say slightly disagree on 29. Question 30. All citizens charged with a crime, no matter how obviously guilty or problematic they are, should have the right to an impartial trial, fair representation, and due process. Yeah, I mean, that I'm inclined to agree with that one. I'd point out that the question is about the okayness of the getting, not the giving. Okay, true, it does say someone can inherit, which I suppose that's maybe most naturally thought of in terms of the getting. But don't they go together, one might think? Like, is there really the giving without the getting? I mean, I guess one could give it and then, like, the state takes it all away. But then we would be inclined to say, like, it wasn't a successful giving. Like, one attempted to give the money, but, like, failed in the attempt. So I'm not sure I see why it would make a difference whether we think of it in terms of giving or getting. Like, could it ever be okay to get the money but not to give it, or vice versa? I'm trying to wrap my head around a case where the verdicts on these two would come apart. And maybe there is one. I'm just not sure I can think of it at the moment. You can give as much as you want, but the inheritor has to play a merit-based game show to determine how much they get. Okay, that's a really funny suggestion, and I like that thought, Bello. I know you're just putting it forth as a joke. If somebody were to put that forth as a serious proposal, then I guess my objection would be, wouldn't that still be interfering with people's choices of giving? In that, for example, like, let's say I wanted to give my wealth to my kid, but then they were required to go on the game show, and suppose the kid, for whatever reason, like, just did not win at the game show, then, like, they wouldn't be able to get much of the wealth. It seems like that would interfere with my decision of, giving it to my kid. Inheritance gets taxed. Right, yeah, so we could just say, yeah, maybe inheritance gets taxed. Like, to how much a degree it gets taxed or should get taxed, I guess there'd be room for debate on that in its own right. But it could be, yeah, maybe that's just the best solution to this overall. All citizens charged with a crime... Oh yeah, this is the crime question. Should have the right to an impartial trial, fair representation, and due process. This is one of those ones where I think it sounds very good in principle to say yes, and I am strongly tempted to say yes. Nevertheless, I do think there are certain cases, at the very least hypothetical cases, I can imagine where one might argue, like, what if the state, like, let's say there's a class of criminals, like, so pervasive and where things have gotten so bad that the state just doesn't have the resources to give everyone involved an impartial trial, fair representation, and due process. Like, maybe lawlessness and crime has become so rampant that when somebody, like, is obviously guilty, like, there's tons of video evidence and so on, and, like, no one is questioning their guilt, maybe in those cases the state is justified in cutting some corners that it would not otherwise be justified in. Like, I can imagine cases like that. Whether they actually obtain is a different question. But for this one, yeah, I want to go either slightly disagree or no opinion either way. Should the right to impartial trial, fair appreciation, due process. Well, actually, instead of like, maybe I'll go no opinion either way. This one, I could see plausible arguments on both sides. My worry is that if choosing slightly disagree, oh wait, no, strongly. Didn't mean to choose strong disagree. Slightly disagree. Then, like, allowing the state to make exceptions always introduces the possibility that it gets abused in the future for something like this. So there is that caveat. But yeah, actually, maybe I'll go for slightly disagree. I think there's room to debate this one. This makes me think of Rawls' Veil of Ignorance, where the souls rating reincarnation have to determine a universally inheritable societal outcome rather than a familial one. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we could think about this in Rawlsian terms of the Veil of Ignorance. We know that some people in the society are going to give large inheritances, but like we don't know which person will be. Maybe that would be the way of making the most just rules. So kind of akin to Tia's view, maybe the giving is about a better world for them to be born into, rather than having an advantage over others. Okay, but that still wouldn't be like an ethical difference between the giving and the getting right here. Because like the people in the Veil of Ignorance, behind the Veil of Ignorance, would know that they're going to be born into a world where some people give a lot of wealth and some people get a lot of wealth. And they don't know if they'll be one of the ones giving, one of the ones giving, or one of the ones who neither gives nor gets. But just in light of what they know about the society, they'll just have to decide like how much, if at all, inheritance should be taxed. But I do agree, yeah, this does seem like a promising application of Rawls' Veil of Ignorance. I think it's interesting to talk about this in terms of tractability of government action, how petty/serious a crime deserves a whole trial with costly due process. Right, yeah, because I mean, I think it's natural, at least for me, to imagine just cases of the justice system being overwhelmed and what a state should do in cases like that. And we get into some tricky issues about what the state ultimately should do, but yeah, it's because of cases like that that I'm inclined to say slightly disagree on this one. But yeah, I find it immoral to pass on an obscene amount of wealth to your kid, particularly if it isn't taxed. I'm inclined to think that doing so is discompassionate, not just to others, but even for one's kid, because of how it would affect their values. Interesting. Because of how it would affect their values. I guess the kind of case that you seem to be thinking of, you can tell me if I'm wrong, is maybe the kid's values would be like, oh, I deserve to be handed everything and not have to work for anything. And I can imagine some kids coming away with that kind of thinking as a result of this. I can also imagine maybe for certain other kids it might work better. Like, let's say the parent gives them this money and tells them, like, look, I've given you all this money, but really you ought to go and make something of yourself with it and, you know, use it for good purposes. And like, if the kid really takes those words to heart, I can imagine cases like that maybe working out well, and the kid starts a really successful business or like helps a lot of people. Maybe that's being optimistic of me, though. I don't know. Maybe most real life cases wouldn't work out that way, but I'd like to think they could. I agree with Tia in that a massive lump sum that accumulates generationally is liable to cause problems, especially in societies where currency is liable to generate more currency. Oh, yes. The rich get richer. That they do. Question 31. It is wrong to let friendship obstruct justice. For example, covering for a close friend who drunkenly performed a hit and run. Okay, yeah, I'm thinking agree on that one. Although, I mean, to be fair, it's not exactly an easy decision. Like, there's a part of my intuitions that think, like, wouldn't the best thing be to not cover for one's friends in this case? I mean, to me, a large part of it has to do with the severity of the crime. Like, if it's something very minor, like not that anyone like reports anyone for speeding, but like if we hypothetically lived in a society where you could like report people, like if you caught them speeding, then like if my friend were to speed just kind of like slightly on one occasion, I think, yeah, like it would be ridiculous to like report them for that. But like drunkenly performing a hit and run, that sounds more serious. So I think that or like we could even imagine more serious examples. Like if my friend murdered someone, I don't think that I would be inclined to cover for them. In fact, I know I wouldn't be inclined to cover for them. And it would seem to me highly implausible to say that I should cover for them. So when I think it's not just something trivial, but when there is genuinely justice at stake, yeah, it seems to me like justice comes first before friendship. Maybe inheritance is justified insofar that the giver is also obligated to proportionally give to non-descended posterity. Oh, yeah, like maybe if they're an obligation, like whatever inheritance you give to your kid, you have to give at least as much to just society more generally. Interesting proposal. I mean, I guess that would limit people's choices, but maybe the extent of the limitation of the choice could be justified there. Maybe it would be worth it for that. I can see what you're saying, but I honestly just don't think power should be that concentrated. I think there should be a ceiling on the amount of money you can pass on. Yeah, I know, I think that's a reasonable thought. That even though we might generally be inclined toward, giving people freedom to do with their money as they please, there are some arrangements that just end up giving people too much power. And so maybe the state is justified in restricting those arrangements. I think if one is going to argue for restrictions on inheritance, I think that's probably the most plausible way that one could go. Yeah, bro code versus con. Basically, yeah. Axe, I once stole food as a kid because I was hungry. What are you going to do now? Oh, yep. Reporting you to the authorities. The Canadian Mounties, or whatever they have up there, they're going to come knocking down your door any minute to you. Wait, is bros before hoes morally defensible? Wait, that's filtered? Oh, well, I can see it in live chat online. I think it is, but with the caveat that sometimes the hoes can be your bros. That is Axaeon's nugget of wisdom for the day. It's that bros and hoes are not mutually exclusive categories. Question 32. The primary goal of government should be to prioritize the interests of their country and those who currently live in it, rather than pursue the well-being of humanity at large. The interests of their country, those who currently live in it, rather pursue the well-being of humanity. Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with, or at least slightly agree. I mean, I do think for governments, I don't think they can completely neglect the interests of other people in other countries. Like whoever's leading the government in a given country should have at least some level of concern for citizens of other countries. But at the same time, it does seem right to me to say that if a given government is prioritizing citizens of other countries over their own, or even like equally with their own, then I think they would be open to a plausible charge of just like not doing enough for their own constituents. So yeah, for that one, I would say slightly agree. Like part of the duty of I guess leading a given country is to do right by the people in that country, especially if it's a case where the people elected you specifically to do that. So yeah, very much so. Sorry, we're asking the hard questions here. Hey, no need to apologize. Never need to apologize for asking the hard questions. That's what we philosophers are here for. My uncle was in the RCMP. Oh, so joke's on you. Okay. I didn't know that about your uncle, Tia. But that is a neat connection for an uncle to have. Computer search anarchist library for bros before. Yeah, I don't know if there's much about that on anarchist library, but there might be. Presupposing that governments should exist at all, it seems to me like it should be sovereignty concerned with its own constituents. Yeah. Right, yeah, we are, I guess, presupposing that governments exist at all. So here we're presupposing that we have not returned to monkey and that, yes, we are dealing with actual governments. Also, hi, Blue Ice Cubes, welcome. Well, we're getting ethical. Indeed, we are. Indeed, we are. I said slightly agree as well, if I remember correctly. I see. Fortunately, at the end of the day, the government does need to prioritize interests of its own country to a limited extent, since this isn't One Piece and there isn't a world government. Also, if it were One Piece, like, it would be a never-ending series of episodes, so... yeah, I don't... Yeah, One Piece... I don't know, should I get started on One Piece chat? I've never seen it. But I know what it is, and I know it's apparently a long haul, if you really get into it for that. I've been thinking of starting it one of these days, but still a little on the fence. Well, what about in the cases where one given government's constituents are uniquely poised to threaten an international gallery of moral patience? Yeah, I think in that case, I would be inclined to say that, yeah, the government shouldn't let them do that. So that's a good case, Bello, there. So for the development of weapons of mass destruction, there's a case to be made that that country should act in its own interest versus humanity at large. Yeah, I mean, one way to think of it is that maybe, if we're just thinking of this in numerical terms, maybe each citizen of that country gets a value of 1, like how much their well-being is to count in the government's decisions. Whereas maybe people of other countries get a value of like 0.2 or 0.3 or whatever value you assign. Because that would allow, like, if the number of people who are going to be affected by a given decision is great enough, like if it's just to benefit a few people in our country at the cost of millions upon millions of people in other countries, then the government could rightly say, like, okay, this should not be allowed. But the government would still be prioritizing its citizens in an important sense there, in the sense that it weighs their well-being more heavily. It's just that it still weighs other citizens' well-being to a certain extent, an extent that can, in extreme cases, outweigh the well-being of its own citizens. He actually didn't like me and is also dead, so it's honestly a non-story. Oh, for your uncle? Okay. Well, sorry to hear that he didn't like you, but anyway, sounds like you don't have to worry about him breaking down your door. But, or at least if he does, I guess it'll be like a zombie version of him, which is maybe even more terrifying. Sometimes even I feel stupid in Axis chat, and today is one of those days. Oh, why do you feel stupid? I hope I haven't said anything to make you feel that way. Yeah, I don't think anyone should ever feel stupid here. I think even if people bring up concepts or ideas or readings or philosophers that you might not have encountered yet, I think coming into a chat like this and just participating in the discussion and thinking of all these things is itself the sign of a very smart person. And it's also the sign of a very smart person to be willing to put oneself in situations where one encounters new ideas. So I think that that's a wonderful thing to do. But it's okay, I look good and I sing. Which are also wonderful things, to be sure. That's why, for anybody who hasn't seen Tia's singing streams, Tia does some very nice singing streams, which you can find on her channel. Question 32, or 33 rather. A society works best when most of its members share similar values, beliefs, social norms, and mannerisms, with newcomers being expected to assimilate/adopt these values before joining. That one, I'm inclined to at least slightly agree. I think when people have different values and beliefs and norms and so on, it can cause friction in various ways. And I think that newcomers to a country do have, to a certain extent, an obligation to assimilate. Which is not to say that there's an obligation to completely give up their home culture or anything like that. Like, they can still preserve their home culture, but I think that when, for example, there are parallel societies within a given country where people like don't even share the language or don't share many of the values and don't feel like they have any connection to the country, I think that that can cause issues and that can cause resentment in the native population, so to speak. So this one, yeah, I'm inclined to say slightly agree. Nobody is treating me badly here. It's just the new terminologies are popping up left and right. My brain is hurting looking them up every 5 minutes. Okay. Well, in a way, it makes me glad to know that that's part of the experience of these streams, because, you know, I always hope the streams are educational, and it sounds like you've had the experience of, or you've been having the experience of getting to learn new things from them. So I think that's really cool. Question 34. If an external threat ever attempts to exploit one's homeland and its people, every citizen should be willing to stay behind and sacrifice their life to defend it if called upon. This one, I think, is just a little too strongly worded. Like, every citizen will stay behind and sacrifice their life to defend it if called upon. Yeah, this one, I'm going to say disagree. Particularly because, like every citizen, like including children, like including people with families, like sometimes people, like let's just say you have a family where, like, maybe it's a mom, like we'll just say like it's a single mom who in all likelihood would not be able to provide much help to the war effort if she were to stay behind and try to fight, but where her life is very important to her kids and where she could flee with her kids. To me, it would just seem crazy to say that, yeah, she's obligated to stay behind and fight rather than escaping with her kids. So 34 is going to be a disagree from me. I think it's easy to see it both ways with question 33. The reasoning that people can always assimilate after moving to the country. Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah, that is a good point, because I think the way question 33 is worded is maybe not ideal when it says, with newcomers being expected to assimilate/adopt these values before joining. One might think that maybe that's kind of a strict requirement to assimilate before one even joins the country. Yeah, to me, like, I would want to say it's enough if somebody joins with the intent of assimilating. Maybe they haven't completed it perfectly, like the day that they moved to the country. But as long as there's a genuine intention there and they're genuinely making progress, like, I would want to say that's fine. So I guess that's part of the reason why I go with slightly agree rather than a more strongly agree, is I think I see what the question is intending maybe, but yeah, the before joining there is maybe something they could have put a little better. For 34, I think some people would ask, you can easily renounce your citizenship. Some other people would also say that being stateless is a form of unreasonable duress in itself. Oh, every citizen should willing to stay behind and sacrifice their life. Oh, so like, in other words, if one isn't willing to stay behind, one should renounce one's citizenship. Yeah, I mean, I think that is fair as far as it goes. I'm just thinking of cases where maybe the threat is so pressing or so exigent that one might not have the opportunity to renounce one's citizenship before leaving the country, and like maybe one's able to renounce it later. But yeah, it just seems to me like it would be quite implausible to say that every citizen, like even citizens who have not yet renounced their citizenship, should be required to or should be willing to stay behind and sacrifice their life. Let's see, 35. Some people, on the basis of their talent, risk taking hard work and/or contributions, are more deserving of wealth than others. I mean, yeah, this one, I want to say, yeah. Seems like some people contribute more to the world than others. Like some people just make better use of the talents they have. I mean, partly it could be a matter of having more talent, but like even with two people of the same talent, like some people just use that talent to more constructive ends than others. And it doesn't seem to me like there's anything wrong with the people who use those talents more having more wealth than others. Or that does seem to me like they are more deserving of that wealth. So for 35, I want to say agree. 36. If a citizen enjoys the quality of life, culture, and civilization of their country more than others, they should support actions which increase its external might, power, and influence on the world stage. So the quality of life, culture, and civilization of their country more than others, they should support actions to increase external might, power, and influence on the world stage. I think it's kind of a cop-out, but on this one I want to say, like, oh, like, if their country actually does have a better quality of life, culture, and civilization than other countries do, then yeah, like, they should support these actions that would increase the influence and power of their country on the world stage. But of course, the question doesn't give us any stipulations on that. It just kind of leaves it open. Like, if the person is wrong about their country actually being superior to others in these ways, then, like, maybe they shouldn't, you know, support these measures. But I don't know if I can get out of it that easily. Yeah, I mean, in light of that caveat, I might just have to say no opinion either way, which is maybe a little unsatisfying, but I really don't know what else I can put for this one. To me, like, it just depends on so much, like, is the person right, you know, to think of their country this way? I guess I would go with that sort of objective criterion rather than a subjective one of just, like, does the person happen to enjoy this more? But also, yeah, I personally completely disagree. The citizens shouldn't owe governments with their lives. That seems like an unreasonable exchange. I see. Yeah, to me too. I think that's a very fair way of putting it, Billa. Willing is questionable. It's more out of necessity, yeah. Yeah, for some of these things, you're right, that Tifa Ninja, that sometimes that can come into play. So yeah, 36, no opinion either way. Which, so far, chat, I think I've avoided using this option for a whole lot of them. Like, I think I've only answered this like 2 or 3 times. So far I've been doing pretty well, luckily, on not copping out with the no opinion either way. Let's see if I can keep it up on these next ones. 37. Certain inanimate objects should be treated as sacred. Immoral to disrespect them, even when no property damage is done and nobody is around to witness it. For example, doing comedic poses in front of a war memorial. Ooh, that's a good example. My first example I was thinking of was the flag, but I think, yeah, the war memorial might be a better example. Should be treated as sacred. Doing comedic... It's funny because when I first read just the main text of question 37, my intuition was to say that no, that certain inanimate objects should not be treated as sacred. Or that's not the case, that certain inanimate objects should be treated as sacred. Such that, you know, it's wrong to act in certain ways around them, even when nobody witnesses it, or there's no property damage. But then with this example, doing comedic poses in front of a war memorial, I think that helps me kind of sense a way in which this might be wrong. Namely, that it fails to take seriously what the memorial represents, or fails to show proper respect. Yeah, here it does say immoral to disrespect them, so I guess the notion of respect, it comes in quite heavily here. I would want to say on this one, maybe slightly agree. I could see myself being persuaded that I'm mistaken about this one. But nevertheless, I think there is something in me that would find this kind of thing distasteful, even if, you know, nobody saw it. I don't think, to be clear, I don't think it should be banned or anything like that. Here, just focusing on the part of, like, is it immoral? And yeah, I can see a case being made that it is. If your bro is in danger, should you throw hands? Oh yeah, anything to help save your bro. Yep. Definitely. Unless, like, he brought it on himself, in which case, I don't know. Yeah, that example puts it into clarity a lot. I think it always helps when a question has an example like that. I said it was wrong too, because just because nobody finds out about it doesn't make it not wrong. As with cheating, for example. Yeah, that's a very good example too about how we might put pressure on the view that something can be wrong only if it causes someone suffering or affects their experience in some other way. You could always just imagine the successful cheater, like someone who cheats and their partner never finds out about it. Still seems like what they're doing is wrong, just in virtue of breaking a promise. A very important promise to their partner. Also, I can't read that question without thinking of Johnny Smalley. Oh yeah, that's a good example too for the War Memorial one. I think there's an analysis of this wherein the offending a specific object itself is offending a person, This goes into like textuality, I think. Versus with the flag or nationalist symbols, not at all. Ooh, yeah. I mean, I guess if it's a specific war memorial, I think that plausibly has a greater connection to the actual people involved. Like if it's honoring veterans of a certain war, like the connection there does feel more direct than just with the flag in general. So it could be why that intuition, or why that example does a better job generating those intuitions than something like the flag. Question 38. Ooh, getting close to the end of these, chat. An individual who is well-intentioned but could be considered a social misfit, weak/timid, and dull-witted, should be given the same courtesy and respect as their peers, rather than treated as a burden by society. Ooh, yeah. For anybody who saw my streams of the Forgotten City, you know, the first thing I'm thinking of now is Dooley from that game, the character Dooley. He was a character who had some cognitive difficulties, but was very nice. I'm gonna have to read this one again to see where I stand on that. So, okay, they are well-intended, so that's good. But can be considered social misfit, weak/timid, and dull-witted. The same courtesy and respect as their peers, rather than treated as a burden by society. I'm inclined to say at least slightly agree. Like, I think there's a certain minimum of respect that everyone should have. And that certainly includes someone like this. I do want to say that I worry a little bit about not so much the same courtesy. Like, the same courtesy sounds fine. Courtesy just seems like one of those words where the idea of a certain threshold or a certain minimum seems built into it. Respect is one that I'm a little iffier on. Not because I think that this person deserves to fall below the minimum of respect, but just, for example, if there's someone who has done extraordinary things with their lives and with their life and has helped many people and has contributed to many wonderful causes and so on, I want to say that perhaps that should occasion a certain kind of respect that maybe not everyone gets to have. Maybe that occasions a distinctive kind of respect, or a special kind of respect. And here it's not just a distinctive respect that is not, you know, given to those who are dull-witted or a social misfit, but like a respect that's maybe not necessarily given like to anyone who falls short of whatever, you know, extraordinary accomplishments this person has. Yeah, my main worry about this is saying like a stronger agree, like a regular agree or strongly agree, to me would seem to come a little too close to suggesting that the level of respect given to everyone in society should be the same. Whereas my view would be more of like, sure, everyone deserves a certain minimum, but past that level, perhaps there are differences that could be justified. Kind of an uncomfortable question, but that is sort of where I stand on it at this moment. In hindsight, I feel like Dooley was actually a really tasteful depiction of an intellectually disabled person. He was very easy to empathize with while still having flaws and limitations. Yes, well said to you, and I agree 100%. Yeah, like the other characters in that game, he was quite well written in that way. It was also just really funny that like the moment you let him out of prison, he very innocently stole the golden object and then, you know, caused the golden curse to come down to everyone. It was kind of, I thought, very tastefully humorous, but the way that the game set that up. Could calling someone out on the ramifications of an individual's actions/social demeanors, regardless of well or poor intention, be considered treating them with an equal amount of respect? The ramifications of their actions or social demeanors. I think so. Like, if somebody does something wrong and you're like, hey, dude, like, that's not cool, I think that in a way is treating them with an equal amount of respect, because you're showing that you respect them enough to have faith that they will moderate their behavior in better ways. You're showing that you view them as sort of called to a higher standard than whatever it is that they're doing. So I might have misunderstood the question, but that's at least my first thought in response to it. I think I said slightly agree as well, on the basis that well-intentioned people with drawbacks still shouldn't be totally immune to criticism just because we feel sorry for them. Yes, that is also a very fair way of putting it. 39. Mentally sound adults should have the absolute right to decide what they inject into their own bodies, even when it may be detrimental to public health. This includes both using drugs such as fentanyl recreationally, as well as refusing vaccination. So I was on board to say yes, right up until it got to the caveat about like even when it may be detrimental to public health. Because when it's detrimental to public health, now other people's interests are in play, not just the people who are deciding whether to inject something or not. So on this one, I think I might say slightly disagree. I mean, I do worry about this one if we take it too far. I think it is possible to take this view too far. So I could see myself potentially being persuaded of the other direction. But for right now, at least, I'll go with slightly disagree. I think I was thinking a similar thing as Bello. Like, I'm not convinced they should ever be given special exceptions. I see. I think you interpreted my question correctly. Like, I think intellectual disabilities and lapses in knowledge, oh yeah, can be respected without babying them. They should know, right. Though it's a position I've never been in, I'd like to think that if I were in that position, the position of having an intellectual disability, I would respect it for someone to be willing to call me out on whatever things I did that were not what I should be doing. Like, I think I would have much more respect for that than somebody just babying me and not really treating me as if I had any agency at all. So question 40, oh, final set of questions here. I think it goes to 48 maybe. During peacetime, the government should be prohibited from seizing the personal property of a law-abiding citizen, such as a family home, for state planning, such as trying to construct a public railway without their consent, even if dues are paid in compensation. The personal property of a law-abiding citizen. This one gets tricky too, because I'm imagining cases of, like, you know, those awkward cases where there's like a huge highway, but then there's like a hole in the middle, like for someone's house, where they just refused to move. And then, yeah, other cases like that. Yeah, for state planning. Oh yeah, we're trying to construct a public railway. I actually don't know if I have an opinion on this one, though. If I did, it would probably be slightly disagree. But yeah, this one I just don't know if I have strong enough feelings on it. Like, I could see both sides. Might have to do a no opinion either way on this one. 41. In democracy, where leadership is determined by public election, in which every citizen has a right to vote, is universally preferable to any method of state governance where leadership is appointed from the top down instead. Yeah, this one, I want to say, I think in most, if not all cases, I would be inclined toward democracy, but slightly disagree, because I can imagine instances in which the electorate is so ignorant or so unintelligent that I just would not trust them very much to arrive at good decisions of who should be running society, and in which perhaps the state governance is much more trustworthy to just, you know, appoint leadership from the top down. Or maybe even if it is some form of democracy, like this one is a particularly strong form where it says every citizen has a right to vote. I could see potentially more limited forms of democracy, like epistocracy, as it's sometimes called, where only citizens who have a sufficient level of intelligence or education, though of course measuring this would be a problematic area in its own right, get to vote. But yeah, it does seem to me that this universally here is one of those words that kind of triggers my spidey senses. Yeah, I would want to say, yeah, slightly disagree there. think agreeing with 41 looks fine until you realize there are age restrictions. Oh, right, yeah, it doesn't even say age restrictions here. It just says every citizen. So that's another reason why one might be inclined more toward the disagreeing end of it. Yeah, you could simply declare a war on potholes. Oh, like for this earlier one about, seizing property. Like if the house is in the way, like, maybe that's kind of like a pothole in a way. Yeah, 40, that one I just have to go no opinion either way. But 41 I do feel strongly enough to say slightly disagree. This is the Asian communist modus operandi. Naturally, I said I disagree, even though I might be biased. Oh, for 41 right here. Yeah, pointed from the top down. I think agreeing with... Oh, wait, I've already read that comment. I think this question, like real-life democracy, is assuming the secondary condition that citizens are sufficiently educated and informed, as opposed to, like, the medieval times. Yeah, and if we take that assumption on board, then I think I probably would change this one to agree. But without that assumption, I think I'd have to go to slightly disagree. Really losing out in the baby vote, get us on Cocomelon stat. Oh no, Cocomelon. I don't even know what Cocomelon is, to be honest, but I've heard, like, apparently it's the most annoying thing in the world. But, like, kids love it. Basically, it's like turbo-maxing brain rot for kids, especially, like, for iPad kids. Like, they just cannot get enough of this stuff, and, like, parents hate it. What? Oh, the one that's about the government stealing people's homes. I see. Okay. So that's the one about the Asian communist modus operandi. I see. So 42 then, saying, is distasteful for a citizen to publicly question the technical knowledge of scientists, the bravery of those in dangerous lines of work, or the work ethic of manual laborers, if they themselves haven't achieved similar feats. I want to say, in many or most cases, it probably would be, but I can imagine cases where it would not be distasteful. Like, let's suppose that the scientists have all told us, like, one thing is true, but then it comes out like they were all wrong and just were making egregious errors, such that, like, even people who are not familiar with the science could see that the scientists had been screwing up majorly. Then I would want to say it wouldn't be distasteful then for ordinary citizens to question the scientist's technical knowledge. The bravery of those in dangerous lines of work. Yeah, that one's a little bit harder to judge, but the technical knowledge of scientists one makes me inclined to disagree. Yeah, or the work ethic of manual laborers, if they themselves haven't achieved similar feats. Yeah, on this one overall, I think slightly disagree, but not really strong feelings about it. Cocomelon is sort of like Teletubbies, where it's completely nonsensical, but it's much more reproducible because it's 3D animation. Oh, yeah, that does sound awful. Like, with Teletubbies, at least it was live action, so you could kind of respect that. But it sounds like Cocomelon doesn't even have that. It didn't happen to my grandma personally, but it did to millions of South Vietnamese. Oh, yes, at the hands of the Viet Cong. I see. Yeah, for that earlier question there. That's unfortunate. A lot of sad stories from that time. Cocomelon is so overstimulating, I would rather give the babies a stick. Yeah, that's what I've heard, is like it rots, like basically rots their brains. If you want a brain rot max, like, yeah, just turn on Cocomelon. It also happens in the US sometimes, and there's a thing called eminent domain, where the government claims land rights for certain projects, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I believe that is correct. It's not the kind of thing that happens all the time, but yeah, like sometimes that kind of thing can happen. Apparently I liked the Teletubbies when I was super small. Why am I catching strays? Yeah. Hey, well, actually, I have nothing against Teletubbies. I actually think it's kind of just the whole premise of the show is kind of funny in a way. But yeah, but I guess part of that is because it's live action. It has like practical effects and all that. If it weren't for all of that, I don't think I would have as much respect for it as I do. Well, Bello says, okay, I love Teletubbies and I love Cocomelon too. Okay. So Teletubbies and Cocomelon enjoyer. Wow. Nice. If the current governing system has proven itself to be competent, at ensuring the well-being of its own citizens. All of its laws should be followed to preserve social stability, including ones that seem arbitrary or that one might disagree with. Yeah, I want to say disagree. I think even a government that's proven itself competent at ensuring the well-being of its citizens can have some silly laws and some laws that just should be off the books. So I don't think there's any obligation to follow those laws. I wrote my MA thesis on Skibidi Toilet. Okay, wow. Skibidi Toilet and the Rizzler. So it sounds like you're the expert on those topics then, fellow. Now, yeah, if you're gonna, be in for a penny, in for a pound, they might say. Might as well go all the way. Like, go big or go home on Teletubbies and Cocomelon and that kind of thing. I was really fixated on the vacuum cleaner for Teletubbies. I really wanted my mom to make me one. Yeah, I mean, wasn't the vacuum cleaner sentient in Teletubbies? I mean, I guess having a sentient vacuum cleaner would be kind of remarkable. Maybe now I want one of those too. Certain activities are so disgusting that they're deeply immoral, even if completely consensual, physically harmless, and done privately. For example, incest between two consenting adult twin siblings, both of whom are using proper protection. I like that it specifies the protection here. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's important for people who are worried about like birth defects, like if these are like a brother and sister, for example. But on this one, I will say disagree. Actually, maybe I'll even say strongly disagree. I know this one gets controversial. A lot of people will differ from me on this, but I think if they're not hurting anyone and it's all consensual, then like who cares? Like in that case, yeah, like incest seems fine to me. I don't think there's any moral problem one could reasonably raise with it. So in short, for question number 44, yes, incest is wincest. Question 45, society is at its most admirable when businesses, schools, and public institutions follow a culture of perfectionism, prioritizing the enforcement of deadlines, punctuality, quality control, and commitment to long-term planning over more flexible or lax systems. Yeah, this one, I want to say slightly disagree. And it's a little tricky because I think society in general, I might have a different answer than schools. But I do think that certain flexibility is useful. And that includes, I think, giving kids a lot of freedom in schools when it comes to learning. So that's one thing that I'm thinking about here. But like when it comes to like public transport, of course, it's important that trains and other public transport run on time. So really, I do have kind of mixed feelings about this one. And like quality control and all of that, like those things are important. But I also think like, there needs to be room for some flexibility and some like, if somebody needs to like cancel an appointment or like reschedule, like, that's not the end of the world. Like it's okay. There needs to be some kind of realization that like it's fine if that happens. So that's why I go slightly disagree on this one. Chuck, I talked about this for a while, but I said disagree. Oh, I think on this one, yeah, 44. He's showing his Southern pride. Oh no. Yep, my Southern pride. Not Southern pride. Yep, it was inevitable, chat. I do think there's a problem with incest when inbreeding is involved, as that can hurt the child both biologically and socially. Well, thanks for that, Ro. Oh, and by the way, we're welcome back. It's nice to see you again. And I would agree with that too, that if offspring are going to be involved, then it becomes much more ethically questionable. Because then you have, birth defects, and that, of course, yeah, hurts the child both biologically and socially. Since this question specified that they're using proper protection, I just kind of sort of bracketed that. But yeah, if we do take into account cases like that, then I think it gets easier to start raising ethical objections. So question 46, it is unethical for the government to place restrictions on what ideologies, beliefs, and opinions can and cannot be expressed within social media and academia, no matter how dangerous they might be considered. Okay, interesting. Yeah, now we're getting to a free speech one, which I guess is the first. I don't recall any previous questions about free speech. But on this, I want to say, yeah, strongly agree. I think that there does need to be broad freedom of speech to have a free society in general. And to the extent that there are limits on which opinions can be expressed, I think that those are too open to abuse by the government for us to trust the government to use them well. So 486, one of the rare cases of strong agreement for me. I think grace is so important in a system of ethics that it's really hard to agree with the point of perfectionism. Like when Tia stole that sandwich 10 years ago. Right, yeah, like at a certain point, you just have to be like, okay, like, you know, it's in the past, like, we're not gonna trip over ourselves trying to correct everything that someone might or might not have done, especially if it's a case of like a crime of necessity. Like if someone's just stealing a sandwich because like they have to, then that's one thing. Or if someone misses an appointment and they're late, like, you know, or if they just need to reschedule an appointment. Yeah, those kinds of things I think are not worth getting too worked up about. Last two questions. 47. It should be considered socially unacceptable for respected high-status authority figures, such as a publicly renowned general or great scientist, to demand preferential treatment from civil society, such as skipping queues at a hotel. Yeah, I think I would agree with this one. Possibly even strongly agree. Yeah, I think just the fact that someone is respected or high status doesn't mean that they should be able to skip line. Like, no one's above the rules. You know, they should have to live like the rest of us. So that one's pretty easy, I think. Question 48, ooh, final one. It is preferable for the public to be aware of a hard truth concerning them and have it result in outrage/instability than it is for them to be kept under blissful ignorance. For example, you become the new leader of a country and uncover that a previous ruling government, many decades ago, secretly experimented on its citizens, and if this information got out, the outrage would be taken advantage of by many radical groups who are ideologically opposed to you. This one, I'm inclined to say that strongly agree. Yes, it is preferable for the public to be aware of this. And I think in part that's because any attempt to hide truths about these is liable to be uncovered at some point or another. Even if you can hide it temporarily, chances are it's going to come out, or that it might well come out at least at some point. And the more you try to hide it, the longer that cover-up goes on. I feel like the worse it generally is than if you just come clean about it. And then people will trust you more if you come clean about things and are honest about things like that. Whereas the trouble is, if you try to spread noble lies and then people discover that you were in fact lying, they won't trust your government even when you're telling the truth. So that is why I'm broadly in favor of telling the public the truth in cases like this, even if it results in temporary outrage or instability. I think that's a price worth paying for that relationship of honesty with the government's citizens. Let's see, for the, I think previous one it was Rose says, I'd say slightly agree. The only thing that I think should be stopped is direct calls for violence against certain groups. But outside of that, I'm fine with letting society as a whole determine what beliefs should be accepted or not. Yeah, and that's a good clarification too. I think the way I would go on this one is just in line broadly with the First Amendment here in the United States, which would allow a very broad range of expression and freedom of speech, but it would not cover everything. So, for example, incitement to violence would be one of the things that the First Amendment does not cover. Same thing with like threats and harassment and so on. But like outside of that, it would be allowed. That, I think, is probably the best standard when it comes to rules about freedom of speech. My chat had strong opinions about question 48 because it literally came up, oh, in Xenoblade X. But I think people have a certain right to the truth. Interesting to know it came up in that game. But yeah, I think that trying to hide the truth to prevent outrage and instability just to me seems like generally a short-sighted strategy. I think a longer-term strategy would be just to come clean to get the outrage over with and see if then you can keep building things up on a foundation of honesty from that point. Okay, chat, so that's all of the questions. Let us See the truth. See my results. What do you think the results are going to be? Guess we'll find out. Your results. Okay. It looks like, ooh, care was the major one. I'm a little surprised care was greater than fairness, but looks like... Okay. Oh, and then the bottom ones are the binding conservative values, the top individual liberal values. So care at 73, although fairness is pretty close to care, with fairness being 71. And then liberty, oh, I'm actually surprised liberty did not get as high as I thought it would. 56. Still higher than any of the ones in the bottom three, though. So there's in-group loyalty at 44. Purity at 30. Yeah, I'm not surprised purity is the lowest one. I have too many impure thoughts, chat. I'm just an impure guy. And then authority also at 44, just like in-group. Yeah, so the binding conservative values, I don't, I guess, have too much. Though I do have, yeah, more of the individualizing liberal values. It's kind of funny because, like, I'm not someone who is woke, I would say. Like wokeness is not a label that I would identify with pretty much at all. Yet, I guess it's also the case that I'm not really conservative in the sense that at least a lot of people use the word conservative. I guess I would say more moderate if you had to put a label on it. And maybe this test in a way reflects that. Of classical liberal, I guess, is a label some might use for it. Your profile is quite similar to mine. Okay, interesting. embrace the horny. Yep, that's what we got to do. Embrace the horny. I'm actually so intrigued by the categorizations here. I wonder what counts as care and what counts as fairness. Yeah, I think that with care, it's a little tough to give a general characterization of it, but I guess certain cases that might sort of illustrate the difference would be if you like if you have an arrangement where, like, some people are promised a certain reward for getting something, and then, or for doing something, and then, like, the people who don't manage to do that thing are really sad about it, so then, like, you decide to give the reward to everyone. Maybe that would be, like, the caring option, because, like, you're concerned about the feelings of those who lost out. But maybe not the fair option, because, like, now you're going against, like, what you promised. So that would be at least one example. Honestly, I think if this test is to be believed, the only areas we disagree on are guns and giving criticism. Okay. Yeah, perhaps we don't disagree on quite as much as some of our debates might have made it seem. You have to be woke to be doing it, or else your bed is just for sleeping. Yeah, I think my bed is pretty much just for sleeping. There are descriptions for each down below. Oh, okay. Click plenty of descriptions. Oh yeah, what do my results say about my ideology? Left liberal social democrats tend to score very high in care, fairness, and liberty relative to in-group liberty and purity and authority, which they tend to score low on. Conservatives tend to weigh all foundations relatively similarly to one another, valuing each of them to a moderately high level. Fascists tend to score very high in-group loyalty, purity, and authority relative to care, fairness, and liberty, which they tend to score fairly lowly on. And then libertarians, yeah, favoring liberty, no surprise there. It was not uncommon for them to also place high value on fairness. Results do seem to align somewhat with the Overton window. Well, I guess for certain groups, at least, the Overton window. I imagine a lot of people I know, a lot of people I grew up with would probably have a more conservative leaning than I would. But yeah, maybe you should take it, Bella. It's always interesting to help see how one thinks. I missed Axaeon's take on guns. I'm guessing he's pro Second Amendment. He's from Tennessee, I guess. Oh, well, there are plenty of people from Tennessee who are not in favor of guns. But yes, I do think people ought to be allowed to own guns. He's the only 10 I see. Oh, well, you're too kind, Ro. You're too kind. But thank you very much for the kind comment. 16 personalities, fashions. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, like... Oh, yeah, well, they have Marxist-Leninists, too, and progressive socialists. So progressive socialists is high in care and fairness relative to everything else they value, I see, including liberty. So they have Marxist-Leninists, very high in fairness, but they also, okay, sometimes place high value on in-group loyalty, purity, and or authority. So earlier, I think it was you, Bello, had a question about the care, desire to minimize the suffering of others and protect the weak. I see. So here are some correlates of it, such as politeness, emotional openness, childhood innocence. Northern, Western, and Southern European societies tend to place the greatest emphasis on care. Whereas fairness, desire people to be held accountable for their actions in an equal playing field, holding the rules constant for all participants. Interesting. And some of the others a bit down below. I can offer my thoughts on whether these values are irreconcilable now, if you'd like. Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to hear them. To be fair, I'm like a Foucauldian by training, so I feel like from a personal point of view, I don't even think any of the presuppositions the quiz makes hold true under scrutiny. That is just like Foucault, or Foucauldian to say, yeah, like, do these presuppositions even hold true? Is this all just an expression of power? Even taking this quiz, making this quiz, sharing these results, is it all just competing power relations at the end of the day? Now, liberty, it says, okay, desire for people to have agency over their lives without outside coercion from a central authority. Okay, seems like a good characterization of liberty there. Free speech, bodily autonomy, democracy, privacy, self-defense, and voluntarism. Culturally, English-speaking society, namely the United States, tend to place the greatest emphasis on liberty. That's right. Here in America, freedom. Freedom is the name of the game. Now, in-group loyalty, this is the one where you get, I guess, to the more conservative, or at least on a certain sense of conservative values here. Desire for members of one's natural in-groups to collectivize for the benefit of said in-groups. Yeah, I guess it doesn't surprise me. I'm pretty low on that one. Speaking of someone from a country where right to bear arms is not a thing, I do think there should be some basic regulation, but they should be allowed to use them for self-defense, within reason. So yeah, I think that seems like a relatively moderate position, which is that, you know, it's not the case that anything goes, necessarily, but perhaps there should be still, like, some level of ownership allowed for self-defense. So in-group, okay, here we get to self-sacrifice, nativism, national sovereignty, tradition. Yeah, this is all, I guess, the really conservative stuff. How about, okay, purity? Yeah, there's another aspect, another dimension of it. Desire to uphold a standard of high society and avoid behavior that is perceived as primitive, degenerate, recklessly hedonistic, and or spiritually degrading. Health, beauty, etiquette, abstinence, chastity, frugality, animism, and spirituality. Yeah, I don't know, Chad, I think I'm too degenerate to score very high in purity. Yep, strong religious presence, yeah, tend to score high in purity. That makes sense. So I think it'd be interesting if there are different allowances for natural in-groups versus found/conditional in-groups. I'd say I'm inclined to be loyal to the latter, but not the former. Yeah, I think that's a good distinction there, Bello, and I would be more inclined to be loyal to the latter than the former as well. Well, maybe not in my case, because, like, I think I'm very fortunate in that my family is good, but I know there are people who are less fortunate than I am in that respect. And if I were in their shoes, I think I would say that, yeah, it would be the found groups would have more of my loyalty than the former. So first of all, I want to take a moment and ask if you recall our monogamy-related exchange of Substack when I argued something like people's jealousy may be an expression of an innate need. Yes, I think I do recall that. But I see you're writing further threads now, or further comments in the thread, so I'll let you keep typing. While you're typing, see, the Authority Foundation is a desire to establish and conform to rules, institutions, hierarchies, and leaders that are deemed as being essential to the stability and efficiency of society. Values pertaining to authority include lawfulness, respect for elders, trust in experts, discipline, assertive leadership, meritocracy, and industriousness. Culturally, oh, this is the Asian one. East Asian societies with a Confucius influence tend to place the greatest emphasis on authority. Well, it's come full circle, chat. Confucius has made an appearance in the results. I knew he was going to show up at some point. That is all of the descriptions there are on this page of the results. The gun debate feels heated because it seems like a good chunk of the pro-gun defenders to be gun nuts with little regard to responsible gun ownership. Obviously, I know not everyone is like that. Yeah, whenever there is a sizable or very visible contingent of a certain group that's annoying or extremist, then yeah, that tends to make the debate much more heated. Because then it's easier for the other side to just focus on the extremists rather than the people who are a bit more moderate in their positions. So I think I absolutely would agree with that, Ro. You countered with, okay then, do we let people do bad things when they're angry? Which I felt was a misinterpretation of my point. In reality, this research was what I was actually alluding to. Okay, then I see two, so okay. Further comments incoming on that, looks like. But one thing I can say now is that, yeah, with the... When you said, yeah, people's expression of jealousy may be an innate need. I think part of what I was questioning there was whether that justifies acting as jealousy would dictate. And I think the comparison to anger was if a certain level of anger is innate, like unjustified anger. Like, for example, if it's anger upon... I'm trying to think of like what a good example of unjustified anger would be. Possibly just like anger at being insulted. Like if somebody says something, you know, mean about you on the internet, and then you feel angry. And like, let's just suppose it's like a random troll, and so like arguably, like, you know, one is not justified at sort of being consumed by anger in a moment like that. Like the more rational thing would be just to brush it off. I would want to say, yeah, it still seems like even if the anger is at least somewhat innate, wouldn't it... couldn't one still be obligated to overcome it to the extent that one can? And I guess maybe I would maybe draw a parallel there to jealousy. At least that's how I remember that part of the debate roughly playing out. If people simply have innate moral intuitions which cognitive training can't affect, something that in my opinion is borne out both by a priori reasoning and empirical observation, then maybe... Oh, okay, I see the next part's coming up. So I'll let you keep typing the third comment before I respond to that one. But yeah, while you're typing that, I can say, yeah, I'm a little... I think the most surprising part of this for me is that care was as high as it was. I had thought maybe liberty would be the highest. But who knows, maybe I'm someone who actually does have a stronger care streak than I would have thought. And that can be a useful feature of tests like these when they're made well, is that sometimes they can reveal surprising things about yourself. So one thing I'll say to all of you, chat, is that if you haven't taken this test, it is kind of fun, you know, to just put yourself in these various scenarios and imagine what you feel the best answer to be is. So you can get a better sense then of your own ethical thinking from that. So yes, trying to discourage people... Oh yeah, then maybe trying to discourage people from monogamy by calling it immoral is futile. It seems plausible to me that one's attitude toward monogamy is linked to one's purity dimension and can't change. Perhaps. I mean, yeah, perhaps it's related to purity. Of course, I think one very interesting question for all of that would be, are there examples of people who started out with a certain profile in this moral foundations test, but changed it over time, perhaps in response to arguments. I think that would be really curious and really intriguing. To the extent that there are, perhaps it is possible for people to update their thinking on these matters. So I guess the key question I would have there would be, like, supposing that monogamy is linked to the purity dimension, my question would be, okay, is there evidence that people can't change or can't update the purity dimension, or like any of these dimensions? Because I would like to think that, like, if somebody encounters an argument that, you know, otherwise seems reasonable, or that they otherwise are not able to respond to, perhaps just reflecting on arguments like that can sort of influence their thinking in a certain way. But I could be mistaken. Maybe it's time to shill care ethics? Yeah. Maybe it is, Bello. Maybe it is. Oh, I was also thinking in somewhat close terms to Tia when I first read the monogamy argument that it possibly seems morally futile / morally irrelevant. Yeah, so it could very well be that if the goal were to discourage people from practicing monogamy, maybe that goal is not served well by just putting forth an ethical argument. And I think that's a fairly plausible suggestion. Like, one could ask, like, okay, how often do ethical arguments really change people's behavior about anything? So yeah, like one might have a good point there. Of course, I would say my goal in putting forth the argument was not so much to influence people's behavior. I mean, if it does do that, then, you know, I think that's fine. And there have been people in the past who have told me that reading my work has inspired them to at least try non-monogamy. But really, ultimately, my goal with putting forth the work on that was just to sort of get at the truth, or at least what I see as the truth, or to make an impression, to make a contribution in a conversation, a philosophical dialogue that I hope will ultimately help us reach understanding of the truth on those matters. So even if it ultimately doesn't change anyone's behavior, I think that just my main motivation in doing any kind of philosophy is just more about trying to understand the truth than trying to make any kind of practical influence. Because I think that discomfort at retracting the assumption of monogamy is a withdrawal of a relationship conditional on comfort that isn't met. Wait, I'm gonna have to read that again. The discomfort at retracting the assumption of monogamy is a withdrawal of a relationship conditional on comfort that isn't met. Okay, I will admit I'm having a little trouble parsing that, but it sounds like the thought is something like the discomfort at the thought of becoming non-monogamous is that people would no longer be comfortable in their relationships if they were non-monogamous. And yeah, I do think that's a thought many people have, is like, you know, how could I be comfortable if my partner were dating others? And so I guess this is where jealousy comes in, and other things like that, or like practicality, for example. People wonder, like, how could a relationship like this be practical? How could I be free from jealousy? And so I think that there are good responses to those objections. Of course, I could be wrong, but I guess that would take the debate into the territory of those sort of more specific proposed reasons why one might not be comfortable with non-monogamy, and whether those reasons ultimately hold up or not. Anyways, as for whether it's possible to find arguments that convince committed opponents, my working theory is not really, which raises the question of how does society create laws and ethical norms that a plurality of people will be happy with. I'd say the best compromise may be to focus on fairness and liberty, as if the statistics are accurate, those are the most popular dimensions. Yeah, it does seem like with fairness and liberty, those perhaps have the best potential for, like, showing people, like, hey, you benefit from this too. Like, if you're in a society where people in general are free, like, that means you get to be free. Or like, if people in general are treated fairly, that means you are treated fairly. So if we go back to the Raljian veil of ignorance, I can see how, yeah, fairness and liberty would perhaps be especially important there. I understand what Bello is saying, I think. Like, you no longer have leverage if your partner neglects you, kind of thing. Oh, was that the thought, that you no longer have leverage if your partner neglects you? Yeah, I mean, to the extent that that's... Or if somebody were to put forth that thought, I guess I would want to say, well, even if your partner is neglecting you, I mean, they would still presumably care about you to some significant extent, if they're in a relationship with you at all. And if they don't, like if they really have lost their caring for you, then I would want to say that the fact that all it took for them to do that was finding a relationship with someone else, or finding a relationship with an additional person, I should say. I think you're better off without that person anyway. And I think the fact that now you know that means that even though it might be painful in the short term, I think it's something that will ultimately prove to be good for you and will hopefully help you find someone whose valuing of you is more genuine and more robust than that of the person that you were previously with. I think that's what I would say to someone who's going through that kind of situation. Sorry, I think it's messy. I meant, like, if I entered a relationship thinking it would be monogamous, I think wanting to leave the relationship due to it opening up would be morally irrelevant. Oh, like if the other person wanted to make it non-monogamous, then like that would be morally irrelevant because you had entered the relationship under the assumption that it would be monogamous. So I feel like I might still not be getting it, but it sounds to me like maybe that's the thought. But currently I feel the main issue with your argument is it relies on the assumption that people can change their negative feelings about non-monogamy. I feel like in the absence... okay, continuing on to the next comment. Yeah, I wasn't expecting this to turn into a discussion of the moral status of monogamy, but, you know, hey, that sometimes philosophical discussions can go in unexpected directions. But yeah, on your earlier comment, Bello, it says, I think wanting to leave the relationship due to opening up would be morally irrelevant. Like, the fact that you want to leave the relationship would not give you a moral reason to leave, is maybe what it sounds like there. Chat is such a bad medium for this stuff. Yeah, no, and to be fair, like, I sympathize with you all because chat really does not have a very high text limit for individual comments, and it takes time to type things, so there's a natural delay. So yeah, you all are in a much harder position than I am now when it comes to discussing these thoughts and debating these thoughts. I realize you all are doing the best you can in a very limited medium. So, and I appreciate that you are willing to raise your thoughts in this way, so thank you. I feel like in the absence of empirical evidence that it is possible, it seems more right to assume that it isn't. Even if it is, a lot of pro-monogamy arguments seem trauma-derived anyway. So calling it immoral is... Oh, another thread coming up. But yeah, on the first point there, that people can change their negative feelings about non-monogamy, part of the reason why I think that they can is that these negative feelings often seem to be bound up with certain beliefs about non-monogamy that one might question. For example, the belief that non-monogamy is impractical, or that a non-monogamous relationship is such that, like, the fact that your partner is interested in additional partners means that they don't respect you as much, or don't like you as much, or don't love or value as much. And to me, it seems like those are beliefs that we have independent grounds for doubting. Like, those are beliefs that we can just see are not true. And it seems to me that if people can overcome beliefs like that, at the very least, their whatever negative feelings they have toward non-monogamy should be reduced somewhat, even if not eliminated entirely. I would just find it very implausible to think that their negative beliefs about non-monogamy would not be affected at all by giving up any of the more specific negative beliefs they have about non-monogamy. Even if it is, a lot of pro-monogamy arguments seem trauma-derived anyway, so calling it immoral is an unhelpful approach. It's like lecturing somebody about how gimping 4th of July celebrations is immoral when fireworks trigger their PTSD. It's insensitive and tone-deaf. So I'm gonna have to look up that word to make sure, because it's one of those words I haven't encountered in a long time. Is it gimping or gimping? GIMP. Getting that the image editor software. Crafting and materials. Gaming slang. None of these definitions seem to go along. Maybe it's a typo, or maybe I'm just not. I don't know the slang, but anyway, like yeah, just 4th of July celebrations, because like yeah, fireworks trigger their PTSD. It's immoral and it's it's insensitive and tone deaf. I mean, I don't know. I think if somebody complains that 4th of July celebrations are immoral, then I don't want to say like that view could be true, it could be false, but I'm not sure I see how it would be insensitive and tone deaf. Like it might not have much of a probability of changing people's behavior, but you know, we might just have different senses of what it is that makes something insensitive or tone deaf. But anyway, I know as for this, it's a big topic, and probably it's help I'm being misunderstood. Okay, well, I'm sorry, I tried. But anyway, no, I appreciate that you shared your thoughts on it, and yeah, probably it's unlikely that we will come to agree on this, at least here in this particular chat, and that's okay. You know, philosophers don't always agree on things. In fact, I would say it's not even the norm. Philosophers have a way of having different thoughts, but appreciate that you're always willing to share your perspective, so thank you for that, Tia. Yeah, and thank you again, by the way, for the idea of you know, taking this test on stream. I certainly enjoyed getting to see what the different foundations were. But probably here in a second. Oh my god, please give me a chance to rephrase. Okay. If you want to rephrase, that's fine. Yeah, take your time. I'm gonna drink some water in the meantime. Okay, that's better. I feel like disagreeing with others is how philosophers pay their bills. Yeah. I think philosophy would be pretty boring if philosophers all agreed with each other. Oh yeah, twin earth water. Yep, that was some good XYZ water that I just had. Tia, you're God's strongest soldier to try to put this together in a chat window. Yeah. Yeah, but putting this together in a chat window is no easy feat. Yep, so I appreciate your willingness to do that. In theory, non-monogamous relationships are perfectly fine as long as it's consensual between all parties. But in practice, it can be difficult to maintain, especially if it started monogamous. Yeah, so I do tend to question the point about practicality and whether they need to be less practical than monogamous ones. Now, I do think, though, that there are certain cases where people can run into practical difficulties. Like, particularly when you say, like, especially if it started monogamous. Like, probably the worst way for any non-monogamous relationship to start is if it starts monogamous, and then especially if it's a case of one person cheats, but then they tell the cheated on partner, like, oh, I actually really like this other person, like, why don't we just open up the relationship? And so the cheated on partner decides to agree to it, and then they start becoming non-monogamous that way. I know that that's not how every such relationship starts, or how every initially monogamous relationship transitions to non-monogamy. But like, especially when it does start that way, then it's just starting off on the wrong foot, and there could be a lot of resentment, from the cheated on partner. So all of that is very natural, I think. And when it comes to ones that are starting monogamous, but then like each partner decides, in the absence of any cheating, to open up the relationship, I want to say that that's fine. I do think that even if it starts to become impractical for whatever reason, I would like to think that partners should be able to trust each other enough to negotiate whatever circumstances they're not happy with, and find a satisfactory solution for everyone. At least unless one's partner has given one reason to think that they can't be trusted with that. I like to think that that's something one should trust one's partner to be able to do. I think the expectation of monogamy is simply a comfort, which a lot of people's interest is into relationship happens to be conditional, so expecting monogamy is not morally good or bad. Okay, well, as to why it might be morally good or bad, I guess that would just be, I would tie that back to arguments that I give elsewhere about why it, for me, it would be morally, the moral badness, I guess, would be a matter of seeming to go against love for one's partner by not having an attitude of supporting one's partner's additional relationships if that's what one's partner were to be interested in. So in other words, it seems to me like the ideally loving disposition toward one's partner would be that, like if you were to find someone else that you felt would enrich your life by being in a relationship with them, like I would support you in being with that person. I do think you're right, Bella, when you say that a lot of people do enter into relationships, and maybe even like enter into relationships conditionally on those relationships being monogamous. But I guess I just don't see why that has any bearing on whether monogamy is good or bad. Like, it still seems to me like one could mount a moral argument against monogamy, even acknowledging that. But it could be that I'm misunderstanding your comment again, so if I am, let me know. Let's say somebody finds fireworks genuinely painful in a way that can't easily or quickly be remedied. They prevent their partner from throwing a July 4th party because of it. Okay. Their partner addresses the situation by trying to explain to them why restricting people from throwing July 4th parties is immoral. Do you see the issue with that? Okay, yes. Yeah, I do see the issue with that one. Yeah, I don't think the monogamy case is analogous exactly, but I guess I see better now the point that it's trying to make, so thank you. Yeah, I think monogamy would be more analogous to, like, even like let's say one's part, like a person is going out of town, and the person is such that they are triggered by fireworks, but then but they tell their partner, like, hey, even though you're not near me, like even though it'll be on your own time, like I still don't want you throwing a July 4th party. Like, I think that would be overstepping. I think that would be wrong. I think if the person is at home, then like it's perfectly okay, and they're right to say like no July 4th parties, because I think that has a very clear justification. The restriction on the person's behavior is very narrowly targeted, and it's a restriction that, in the case where it's justified, would be only for where they are in in the vicinity. But yeah, if it's a case of like you can't have any July 4th parties even when I'm not around, then I guess I would, that would be what I would question. Oh my god, not this again. Okay, well, I can sense that perhaps the discussion is starting to irritate you, Tia, so if you'd like to end it there, that's fine. I know it's been a long stream for everybody. But anyway, I certainly don't want to come across as suggesting that resolves the debate. Like, that's just an initial point that I would make. I realize there's lots of room, of course, to debate that further, to offer various points and counterpoints. But I don't think now is the right time to relitigate this. Yes, agreed. Very much agreed with that. All right, so in that event chat, I think probably now is a good time to end it. But thanks everyone for stopping by and for discussing these issues with me. I've enjoyed having you all here. Tomorrow, I'll be streaming some of the puzzle game, Kurogaya, which is a puzzle game I don't know much about, but I know it involves moving blocks and is apparently very creative in its visual presentation. Headphones are finally working. Oh, okay, nice. Good job getting your headphones to work, Jinx. But that will be tomorrow at the same time. So feel free to stop by if you'd like to come to that stream. Thanks for the stream. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Well, thank you for tuning in. I just got here. Oh, sorry. Well, the VOD will still be here, so you can always catch the VOD if you'd like, Jinx. And I will be streaming tomorrow. But other than that, I don't think there's really that much to announce. A bit later, I mean, probably not, well, definitely not this weekend, but sometime next week, I hope to stream some more philosophical things and play some more philosophical games. And there's a video or two that I'm working on now, too, so hope to release that at some point. If this could be solved in one stream, it wouldn't be good philosophy, I think. Thank you for the stream and for the discussion in chat. Bello, that is very well said. And also, it's just been great having you here, Bello, with all of the thoughts that you've added. So thank you very much for your very helpful, very insightful comments. And that goes to all the rest of you as well. Thanks for the stream, Max. You're very welcome, Jinx. All right, so goodbye, everyone. Good night. I'll see you all again soon. But in the meantime, have a great rest of the evening. Goodbye.